It's something we don't always think about, but the entire world really does run on agreements.
It absolutely does. Every single part of it.
And the complexity of those agreements, it just seems to grow exponentially every single year.
Oh, for sure.
Whether you're, facilitating some multi-billion-dollar government defense deal or just negotiating terms for a SaaS platform for your company. It all comes down to a contract, one that has to be meticulously crafted, executed, and then managed.
And that management piece is the part people often underestimate. It's not just paperwork.
Not at all. It's really the financial, the legal, and the operational backbone of pretty much any organization.
That's a great way to put it.
So in a field that's built on precision, on validation, how do you go beyond just having experience? How do you actually prove that you've mastered this really specialized field?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And that's what we're diving into today. Based on the material you sent us, we're looking at professional accreditation, really, the gold standard for validating expertise.
And specifically, two big ones from the NCMA.
Exactly. We're unpacking two of the most significant and I think often confused high-level certifications from the National Contract Management Association, which is the NCMA.
Right, the CPCM and the CCCM.
The Certified Professional Contracts Manager, or CPCM, and the Certified Commercial Contracts Manager, the CCCM.
They sound similar, but they are worlds apart.
So our mission for this deep dive is to basically be your guide through this landscape. We're going to clarify the really granular differences between these two.
What they mean and what they require.
Exactly. What does comprehensive expertise mean versus that targeted specialization? And ultimately, we want to help you figure out which professional track might be the most strategic fit for you right now.
I think that's the perfect way to frame it.
Okay, let's unpack this.
And that distinction you just made between comprehensive mastery and targeted specialization, that's the thread we really need to follow. It's so vital.
Why is it so important?
Because the NCMA, the National Contract Management Association, they're the authority here in the U.S.
They're the awarding body.
Exactly. They don't just hand these certifications out. Their standards are incredibly high, and so that backing, well, it immediately gives a ton of weight to whichever credential you end up choosing.
So no matter which one you get, it means something.
It means something significant. What they both share at their core is this fundamental promise. They're both designed to, drastically boost your professional credibility.
Okay.
These are essential tools if you're serious about career advancement. They open doors, they help with networking in a very niche community, and maybe most importantly, they give you a real competitive edge.
Especially in the job market today.
Absolutely. Just having general business skills isn't enough anymore. Both of these signal a real commitment to excellence, but, and this is the key, they're built to serve very different, very specific needs inside that larger contracting world.
All right, so let's start with the one that feels like it's at the top of the pyramid, the one that's so often called the gold standard across pretty much every sector.
The CPCM.
The CPCM, which stands for Certified Professional Contracts Manager.
Right.
And when you look at the professional literature, the conversations happening around it, it's always described with these really powerful terms, like one of the most prestigious certifications in the entire field.
It has that reputation for a reason.
The recognition it gets is huge, right? Not just in the private sector, but especially in areas like government, defense, energy, places where the contracts aren't just complex, they're, staggering.
The scope and the regulatory burden are just immense in those fields.
Exactly. So this certification basically says, I'm ready for the absolute most complex challenges you can throw at me.
And that prestige, it isn't just arbitrary. It comes directly from the sheer scope of knowledge that it forces you to prove.
It's a validation of that comprehensive end-to-end expertise.
Precisely. It shows that you haven't just, done a few contracting tasks. It proves you've achieved mastery over the competencies that are laid out in the contract management body of knowledge.
The CMBOK.
The CMBOK. And we have to be really clear about what the CMBOK is. It's not just a rule book.
It's more than that.
Oh, much more. Think of it like the architectural blueprint for the entire profession. It covers all 9 functional areas of contract management. It's the framework for the principles, the best practices, the laws, the regulations across the board.
So it's intentionally broad.
It has to be. The whole point of the CPCM is to validate that holistic understanding of the full contract lifecycle, no matter what industry you're in. That's why it's so explicitly designed for people who are already heavily experienced.
So this isn't something you do in your first couple of years.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
This is for people who want to validate that wealth of knowledge they've already built up over years in the field.
And when you say experienced, The requirements for the CPCM really do set an incredibly high bar. It drives home that this is a serious executive-level commitment.
It's an investment of years, not months. Years.
So the standard educational requirement is a bachelor's degree from a regionally accredited school. That kind of sets a baseline for, academic rigor.
Right. Critical thinking, communication, all that.
But what's interesting in the criteria is that the NCMA seems to acknowledge that real mastery can come from decades of practice, not just from a classroom.
Yes. And that's such a crucial nuance. It's so important we dig into that because the source material really highlights it.
So what's the exception?
The exception is that candidates with an associate's degree or even no formal degree at all may still be eligible. But,
Wow.
and this is a huge but, it is not an easy loophole.
It's not a shortcut.
Not even close. This exception is only for candidates who can show, significant, extensive professional experience. We're talking about a track record that basically equals a managerial or leadership role.
So you have to prove it with your career.
Exactly. It's the NCMA's way of saying, look, if you don't have the diploma, you must demonstrate undeniable, exceptional mastery through your work history. It respects the people who learned their craft in the trenches.
And speaking of the trenches, the experience threshold itself, that's probably the biggest hurdle for most people.
It really is.
It's a minimum of 5 years of demonstrable contract management experience. That's a huge commitment.
And it can't just be 5 years doing the same simple task over and over.
Right. The NCMA is very clear about that 5 years has to be comprehensive. It has to cover the full contract life cycle.
You need to show variety.
You do. You have to prove you have experience in high-stakes negotiations, in managing complex contract administration, ensuring compliance with all the shifting regulations.
And closeout. People always forget closeout.
And managing the closeout processes, both efficiently and legally. You have to prove you've seen contracts all the way through, from the very beginning to post-award, multiple times in complex situations.
Situations that expose you to all those different parts of the CMBOK. Exactly.
So given that 5-year gate, which really filters for true leaders, it's no surprise that the exam itself is known to be an absolute beast.
Right. It's built on that same foundation.
It's a comprehensive, holistic test of your knowledge, and it's based entirely on the CMBOK, that blueprint that defines the whole profession.
Let's talk about the structure of that test.
Okay, so you're looking at 180 multiple-choice questions, and you have to complete them in a very demanding 4-hour window.
4 hours, wow.
Yeah, that's less a test of just remembering facts and more of a marathon of applying the CMBOK.
It sounds like it's designed to test your stamina and your strategic thinking under pressure.
That's precisely it. Passing this exam is an unmistakable signal that you not only have the breadth of expertise, but you have the mental fortitude to actually use it when it counts.
And the content covered by those 180 questions is, well, it's staggering.
It really is.
You can't just be good at one or two things. The exam doesn't let you specialize or skip the hard parts. You have to be proficient across the entire spectrum, all 7 of the major areas.
Right. The sources break it down into 7 domains. Let's walk through those.
Good idea.
So first, the foundation. Contract principles and practices. That's your basics, offer, acceptance, consideration, all that.
Your building blocks.
Second is acquisition planning and execution. And this one is incredibly broad. It covers everything from figuring out the initial need for something all the way through solicitation, source selection, proposal evaluation. It's the whole strategy.
Where it all begins.
Third, and this is so critical, is risk management.
Huge.
Assessing, mitigating, and managing all the risks. Technical, schedule, financial factors that could blow up a contract.
And then you get into the really high-stakes, specialized areas. Number 4 is the legal aspects of contracts.
And this isn't just basic contract law, is it?
Oh, no. For the CPCM, this means you need a deep familiarity with the big regulatory frameworks. Think of the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or the DFARS for defense.
Or complex international trade law.
Exactly. The stuff that shapes everything from indemnities to termination rights.
Okay, what's number 5?
Number 5 is where a lot of people struggle. Financial and cost management.
So you have to be fluent in the money side of things.
You have to be. It means you don't just manage the words in the contract, you manage the numbers behind them. You have to understand pricing structures, cost accounting standards, analyzing burden rates, indirect cost pools.
So you can actually audit a proposal and know if the costs are reasonable and allowable?
Precisely. A CPCM has to be able to look at the financial mechanics of a proposal and know if it's sound and compliant, not just if the final price looks good.
That ability to speak both finance and law, I mean, that's what separates an admin from a certified professional contracts manager.
That's the leap,
So that leaves the last two areas.
which are very operational.
Number 6 is contract negotiations and compliance. This is where the rubber meets the road, right?
It is.
Yeah.
The skills to actually reach an agreement, draft terms that work, and then make sure everyone sticks to them after it's signed. Understanding leverage, breaking impasses.
And finally, number 7 is post-award contract management.
The long haul.
Right. Monitoring the supplier's performance, handling complex modifications, managing claims and disputes. Basically everything that happens during that often multi-year performance period.
So when you put it all together,
It's designed to prove you can manage the entire contracting enterprise for a major organization.
exactly. So after hearing all that rigor, 5 years of experience, a 4-hour exam across 7 incredibly complex domains, the question is, why would anyone put themselves through that?
Right. What's the payoff?
And the benefits, according to the sources, they directly mirror that difficulty and prestige.
So on the career side.
You're looking at massively enhanced career opportunities, a much higher earning potential, obviously, because of that demonstrated expertise, and crucially, access to senior-level leadership roles.
It's like a pre-qualification for management.
That's a perfect way to put it. It shows you're ready to oversee a whole contracting office.
So that leads us to preparation. I mean, given the size of the CMBOK, you can't just wing it.
Oh, not a chance. Preparation is a dedicated months-long project. You have to treat the CMBOK like your Bible.
So you need to know every concept, every principle, not just memorize them.
You have to understand them deeply.
And there are resources out there to help, of course.
Vital resources. The NCMA itself, plus other third-party groups, they offer intensive prep courses, webinars, study guides that are all designed to align perfectly with the CMBOK.
But beyond the books, I have to imagine practice exams are key.
I agree 100%. They are probably the most essential tool for any CPCM candidate.
Why is that?
Because the exam tests your endurance over 4 hours. Practice exams don't just tell you what you don't know, they let you fine-tune your exam-taking strategy.
So you learn how to pace yourself.
How to pace yourself, how to make a strategic guess if you have to, and how to stay focused when you're on question 150.
So it's about being ready for the format as much as the content.
Exactly. You can know the CMBOK backward and forward, but if you don't have the stamina and the strategy for that 4-hour test, you will not pass.
Okay, that's a perfect summary of the CPCM, the Apex Generalist, mastering the entire life cycle. Now let's shift gears pretty dramatically and talk about its counterpart,
The CCCM.
the CCCM. So if the CPCM is that comprehensive manager who can work in any sector, the CCCM, the Certified Commercial Contracts Manager, is the highly trained specialist.
A very different animal.
It validates an expertise that's all about speed and transactional efficiency, especially in these high-volume environments.
And that specialization gives it a much clearer, much narrower focus. This certification is built for professionals who are managing contracts almost exclusively in a commercial environment.
So we're talking business to business.
Right. B2B transactions, sales of goods, complex services, leases. Anywhere that the Uniform Commercial Code, the UCC, is the primary legal framework.
And what are the target industries for this?
You're looking at sectors with a lot of non-federal contracting. So think major commercial construction, large-scale manufacturing, and supply chains, IT services, consulting firms.
Basically any private business doing a lot of commercial deals across state lines.
Exactly. They need managers who can execute quickly and reliably under the very specific rules of commercial law.
And what's so fascinating here, and what really sets this certification apart, is that central legal differentiator,
The UCC.
the Uniform Commercial Code. While the CPCM needs you to know big regulatory frameworks like the FAR, the CCCM demands you have explicit foundational proficiency in the UCC.
It's the core of the whole thing.
Right, the UCC is the body of law that standardizes commercial deals across the U.S. If you're managing a contract for, say, $500 million of raw materials, or negotiating a complex software license.
The UCC is your playbook.
Exactly. And the CCCM validates that you know that playbook inside and out.
And I think we need to pause on that for a second on why focusing on the UCC is so critical.
Go for it.
Well, general contract law, common law, it can be slow, it varies from state to state, and it's often just not suited for the speed and volume of modern business.
It's not built for commerce.
No. The UCC was created specifically to standardize the rules for sales and commercial paper. So a CCCM holder understands how and why the UCC is different from common law, and that's a huge tactical advantage in any negotiation or dispute.
And that specialization, it has a big impact on the requirements,
Yeah.
right? It makes it much more accessible.
A huge impact. And this addresses a key question. Why would the NCMA set the bar so much lower, seemingly?
Right, so you still need a bachelor's degree or a global equivalent to get that academic baseline. But the work experience requirement just plummets. Compared to the CPCM's 5 years, the CCCM only requires a minimum of 1 year of experience.
Just 1 year. It's a massive difference.
It is, and it makes the CCCM a perfect credential for someone who's maybe a couple of years out of school and has already decided to focus on the commercial side of things.
It's a much faster path to a very specialized, very valuable validation.
Because you're mastering one deep, specific legal framework, the UCC, instead of the entire breadth of the CMBOK across all these different regulatory environments.
And the NCMA understands that UCC mastery is an immediately valuable skill. Commercial environments need people who can execute quickly. A year of focused experience plus that deep legal training is often enough for someone to operate at a very high level.
So it's an acknowledgement that these commercial roles mature faster in some ways.
In terms of applied legal knowledge, yes. It's faster than a complex federal role where you spend years just learning how to navigate the bureaucracy and the layered regulations.
And the exam structure reflects that targeted approach, too.
It does. It's still rigorous, but it's shorter. The CCCM exam is multiple choice, usually 150 questions, and you do it in 3 hours.
So an hour shorter and 30 fewer questions than the CPCM.
Correct.
The passing score is around 70%, but the real difference, and the source materials really emphasize this, is how practical the questions are.
Right. It's not just about memorizing the code.
No, it's a mix of scenario-based and knowledge-based questions that are designed to test the application of the UCC in real situations.
They want to know you can use the code when a breach happens, or when someone tries to make an oral modification, or when a warranty needs to be disclaimed.
Okay, let's spend some serious time on the content of that exam, because this is where that commercial focus really snaps into view.
For sure. The primary focus, without a doubt, is the Uniform Commercial Code. You have to be ready to analyze situations using the framework of several key articles.
Okay, what's first?
First is Article 1, General Provisions. This just sets the stage. It defines the principles of interpretation, jurisdiction, good faith requirements. It's basically the user manual for the rest of the UCC.
The rules of the road.
Exactly. Then you get into the real heavy hitters that govern most commercial deals.
Which would be Article 2.
Article 2 is absolutely central. This covers sales specifically, the sale of goods. If you're in manufacturing, procurement, supply chain, this is your world. The exam will test how contracts for goods are formed, which is often way more flexible than common law.
And this is where you find the famous Battle of the Forms, right? Under UCC 2207.
That's the one. It's a key concept. If a buyer sends a purchase order and the supplier sends back an invoice with different terms, the UCC has specific rules for deciding which terms win.
And a CCCM holder needs to know those rules cold.
Absolutely. Or you could inadvertently lock your company into terrible terms just by exchanging standard paperwork. You also have to understand implied warranties, like the warranty of merchantability, and how to effectively disclaim them in the contract.
What comes after Article 2?
Next up is Article 2A, which focuses on leases. So this is for equipment leases, machinery, vehicle fleets, any deal where you transfer possession but not ownership.
And since a lot of companies lease more than they buy,
it's critical. You have to know the difference between a true lease and what's called a disguised sale, which would actually fall under Article 9.
Okay, so that brings us to Article 9, secured transactions.
Right. This is where the legal and financial expertise really merge. It's all about how a seller can secure an interest in collateral to guarantee they get paid.
The source material really stressed this, noting that you have to understand how to perfect a security interest. What does that mean?
Perfecting is the key. It's not enough to just say in the contract that you have a security interest. To make that interest hold up against other people, like if the buyer goes bankrupt, you have to perfect it.
And how do you do that in practice?
In practice, it usually means filing a public notice, often a UCC-1 financing statement, which you file with the Secretary of State's office.
So the contract manager needs to make sure the contract supports that filing and that the steps are actually taken.
Yes, even if a lawyer does the actual filing. If your construction firm sells a bulldozer on a 2-year payment plan, the contract manager needs to ensure that if the buyer defaults, your firm can get that specific bulldozer back ahead of all the other creditors. That's the strategic knowledge the CCCM validates.
So beyond just knowing the articles, you have to know the key topics within them.
Oh, yeah. You have to nail down the specifics of contract formation, offer, acceptance, consideration, but as defined by the UCC, which often treats merchants differently to speed up commerce.
You also need to be fluent in modifications under the UCC performance standards.
Like the perfect tender rule and its exceptions.
What constitutes a breach and what remedies are available.
Right, which under the UCC often includes things like specific performance, cover, or incidental damages. If a buyer rejects a shipment, the manager has to immediately apply the UCC's rules on cure and revocation, not just send a generic breach notice.
But it's not just a law exam, is it?
No, and that's a great point. The CCCM successfully combines that deep UCC knowledge with broader commercial contract management fundamentals.
So it still covers the full contract lifecycle, from initiation to closeout, just like the CPCM.
But viewed entirely through a commercial lens.
Meaning you need to know the common contract types in the commercial world, like fixed price or time and materials.
Right. T&M contracts are everywhere in IT services and consulting. A CCCM candidate has to know the risks of each type and how to structure the terms to manage those risks.
And risk management is tailored to commercial liabilities too, right?
Right.
Focusing on indemnification clauses, limits of liability.
Exactly. Different risks than in government contracting. And it also includes being proficient in dispute resolution. This is a critical distinction.
How so?
A CPCM might deal with administrative boards in federal contracting. A CCCM holder needs to master commercial alternatives like mediation and arbitration.
So they need to know the rules for AAA or JMS arbitration.
And the strategic differences. Arbitration is binding. Mediation is not. Knowing that helps you guide your company through a much cheaper, faster process than going to court.
Okay, so given this really specific UCC-heavy focus, preparation has to be very strategic.
Yeah.
You can't just rely on general experience.
No way. Especially if your background is in federal contracting where the UCC doesn't apply.
The study materials are pretty clear. The NCMA says you need the official CCCM study guide.
That's your roadmap.
But because of the UCC focus, you also have to review the actual legal text of the articles, probably with some specialized UCC textbooks.
I'd say that's essential. It's also worth saying that even for the specialized cert, the general CMBOK is still a recommended resource.
Why is that?
It ensures that your foundational knowledge, general risk, negotiation strategy, ethics still aligns with the industry's best practices, even if the legal framework you're using is the UCC.
And the logistics are pretty straightforward. First is eligibility verification.
You send your application to NCMA to prove you have that 1 year of experience and the degree.
And once you're approved, you pay the fee, which is usually cheaper for NCMA members, maybe around $125 to $200.
And then you schedule the exam. NCMA uses the Pearson VUE testing network, which gives you a lot of flexibility.
So you can take it in person at a testing center.
Or you can use their online proctored platform on VUE. That adaptability is huge for busy professionals.
There's one last critical point on prep that the source has raised.
What's that?
The absolute necessity of real-world commercial experience to pass those scenario-based questions.
Yes. 1,000% yes. It's not enough to memorize what Article 2 says about cure.
You have to know what that means in practice.
Exactly. Knowing the definition of conforming goods is academic. Knowing the right legally defensible steps to take when a vendor delivers non-conforming goods 2 days late and your buyer wants to revoke acceptance, that takes operational knowledge.
So the certification forces you to bridge that gap between legal theory and high-stakes commercial reality.
That's the whole point.
Okay, let's shift now and really connect the dots. Let's directly compare these two professional profiles we've just laid out.
The seasoned generalist versus the specialized commercial expert.
Right. The big difference, it seems to me, comes down to three main things. First is the experience level.
The barrier to entry.
CPCM requires 5 years, which validates that deep seniority and broad experience. CCCM needs just 1 year, making it perfect for focused early career pros in the commercial space.
Second is the knowledge base. This is the difference between being an architect and being a specialized engineer.
I like that analogy.
The CPCM is focused on the whole CMBOK, making you versatile across any industry. The CCCM is laser-focused on UCC proficiency, making you indispensable for companies that live and breathe commercial sales, leases, and secured transactions.
And third is the exam itself. The structure reflects that difference.
It does. The CPCM is the longer marathon, 4 hours, 180 comprehensive questions. The CCCM is shorter and more targeted, 3 hours, 150 questions, all heavily weighted towards practical UCC application.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, both certifications share this fundamental commitment to staying current, right?
Absolutely. Neither of these is a one-and-done award. The NCMA is very clear that both designations require ongoing learning.
And both are valid for 5 years.
Right. That 5-year renewal cycle is what keeps the certifications relevant. It ensures they represent ongoing excellence, not just something you did 10 years ago.
Which makes sense, given how fast things change.
For sure. But the maintenance requirements are a little different to reflect their different focus. For the APCM, you need continuing professional education, CPE, and you have to maintain active involvement in the field, which is a bit broader.
And for the CCCM.
It's more specific. You need to complete 80 continuing professional education hours over that 5-year period.
So that recertification process is really key to the whole value proposition.
It is. It guarantees that anyone holding either of these credentials is up to date with critical changes, whether that's an update to the FAR or a new interpretation of the UCC. It means the designation reflects current competence.
So let's bring this all back to the practical benefits for you, the listener, as you're trying to decide which path makes sense.
The choice really depends on your current experience and where you want your career to go.
Right. CPCM for broad leadership and versatility, CCCM for that specialized commercial depth and speed. But the payoff, overall, seems to be shared and pretty substantial.
It is.
Both of these immediately elevate your professional credibility. They enhance your standing with employers, with clients, because it's an external recognized validation of your skills.
They open doors to higher-level roles. A lot of job descriptions will list these certifications as a prerequisite.
And there's the less tangible but maybe equally valuable benefit of getting access to that whole NCMA network.
The conferences, the forums, the community of other specialized professionals, it's huge for mentorship and just knowledge sharing.
Ultimately, whether you're going for the CPCM or the CCCM, the key to passing, especially with those scenario questions, is being able to translate that book knowledge into practical application.
That's it. The whole process forces you to bridge that gap between theory and real-world execution. And that structured professional development is where the true value is. It makes you a more strategic, more reliable partner to your organization.
So to synthesize this,
Whether you go for the broad management expertise of the CTCM, which demands 5 years of experience to prove you can handle executive functions, or you pursue the targeted commercial law depth of the CCCM with its heavy focus on the UCC and a 1-year experience minimum.
both paths are validating a level of mastery.
A mastery that is absolutely essential for thriving in the complex, highly regulated environments that govern modern business today.
So what does this all mean? We've spent a lot of time talking about the incredible emphasis the CCCM places on the Uniform Commercial Code, specifically Articles 1, 2 for sales, 2A for leases, and 9 for secured transactions.
Right, the language of commerce.
This is state-level sales law, not some abstract federal policy. So the provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. How much does understanding the tactical, granular details of commercial sales law, things like the battle of the forms or how to properly perfect a security interest, truly change the negotiating power of a contract manager?
That's a great question.
Is specialization in the UCC just a helpful tactical advantage for a commercial contracts professional? Or is it, in fact, an absolute non-negotiable requirement for effectively protecting the financial interests of your organization in today's high-volume, quick-turn commercial world?
Something to think about.
Thank you for sharing your sources with us and letting us take this deep dive into contract management certifications. We hope this comparison gives you the clarity you need for your next professional move. Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise, stack up the source material, and hand you the crucial technical knowledge you need to specialize and excel in your field. For you, the learner, who is intensely curious and really focused on gaining mastery, today's mission is laser-focused. We're navigating the complex architecture of commercial contract management. We're not aiming for a general overview here. We're aiming for that deep, nuanced understanding that separates an effective manager from a truly strategic expert. We've pulled insights from some specialized legal and professional sources. This is material specifically tailored for those who need to demonstrate true, advanced expertise in contract law and, well, sophisticated commercial practices. We're going beneath the text of the contract to analyze its fundamental design, how it handles financial risk, how its structure resolves internal conflict, and critically, how it acts as your first line of defense against disputes.
That's absolutely right. Our focus today is on three foundational pillars, all of which are critical for building truly robust and protective contracts. We're going to start with a document that is, well, it's often misunderstood in its role within fixed price agreements. It's the whole debate around the necessity, the benefit, and the inherent risk of including a bill of quantities or a BOQ.
Ah, the BOQ. Right, this is where precision meets rigidity, as you say.
Exactly. Then secondly, we pivot entirely. We move from the content of the agreement to its legal architecture. We'll explore the vital structural importance of contract order and precedence. This involves understanding how the documented hierarchy of sections and attachments, how it operates as a self-resolving mechanism, how it prevents contradictions from escalating into these costly legal battles.
Okay, so from the what to the how.
Precisely. And finally, we'll move into the operational realm. We'll be detailing advanced strategies for dispute prevention through meticulous drafting and process control. And we will also dissect the immediate, non-negotiable first step required when a conflict, well, when it inevitably erupts. This really highlights the difference between proactive protection and reactive litigation. Mastering these three areas, it gives you the high-stakes knowledge needed to elevate your contract management expertise into a true competitive advantage.
It really sounds like we're setting the architectural blueprint for building legal firewalls around our projects. So let's jump right into that first major question regarding cost breakdown and transparency. For a professional audience, what is the sophisticated argument for or against the bill of quantities, especially when the price is already fixed?
It's a great question. Let's start by clarifying the technical definition, just to make sure we're all on the same page. A bill of quantities, or BOQ, is a document that provides a really detailed, itemized list of the estimated quantities of work, materials, equipment, labor. Everything required to execute a defined project scope.
Okay.
It's essentially a detailed census of the project's components. It's compiled either by the client's consultant or sometimes the contractor themselves.
And the confusion, I think, arises because we are focusing specifically on fixed-price contracts. If I agree to pay a lump sum of, say, $50 million for a completed water treatment plant, why do I need a 500-page document breaking down every cubic meter of pipe and every single hour of welding labor? The final price is fixed, isn't it?
That is the core conundrum. And the source material confirms that while a BOQ is frequently used in fixed-price contracts, primarily for providing a detailed basis for cost and schedule management, it is not a universal mandatory requirement. Its inclusion, it transforms the fixed price from just a simple single figure into a structure that's built upon specific underlying assumptions.
I see.
And this structure, it brings powerful benefits, but it also carries critical risks related to, reliance and accuracy.
Okay, let's explore the argument for inclusion then. Because for large-scale, really complex projects, the BOQ is often seen as a prerequisite for success. Our sources outline 4 deep strategic advantages.
The first benefit is foundational. It's all about transparency and auditability.
Right.
The BOQ provides a clear quantitative breakdown of how the contractor actually arrived at that fixed price. Yeah. This eliminates so much ambiguity. Both the client and the contractor gain visibility into the estimated unit rates and quantities, which is crucial for internal financial compliance and external auditing.
Especially in public sector projects, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. Or any heavily regulated industry, it provides a reliable benchmark for negotiation right from the start.
And that deep transparency is essential for the second point, which sounds far more strategic than just simple accounting. It's granular cost control and monitoring.
Yes. Even in a fixed-price contract, the BOQ allows both parties to implement sophisticated management tools, something like earned value management or EVM.
So even though the total price won't change?
That's right. The total price is fixed, but the client can precisely track whether the contractor is spending their allocated budget for specific items efficiently. For example, if a contractor is only 50% through the structural steel work, but has already consumed 90% of the budgeted steel quantity.
That's a huge red flag.
It's an immediate, verifiable red flag. It indicates a scope deviation or maybe some serious efficiency issues, and it allows for proactive intervention.
That ability to intervene before the problem becomes irreversible, that has to be key.
It is, and this level of detail also directly enables the third benefit, accurate and fair bidding. When bidders receive a client-supplied detailed BOQ, they are forced to compete on the efficiency of their proposed unit rates rather than just competing on, risk assumptions.
So it standardizes the bidding playing field.
Yeah.
It makes it easier to do an apples-to-apples comparison and forces contractors to price their efficiency, not just their guesswork.
Precisely. And this often leads to a tighter, more competitive, and ultimately a lower final fixed price for the client. All because the contractor doesn't need to pad their bid with these enormous risk premiums to cover unknown quantities or unspecified scope elements.
That makes perfect sense.
And finally, if a variation or change order does become necessary, which, let's be honest, is inevitable in large projects, the BOQ acts as the anchor point for expedited change management and dispute resolution.
It serves as the clear baseline reference.
Exactly. If a client adds, say, 100 meters of road, the price of that variation is immediately calculated based on the unit rate for road construction that's already agreed upon in the BOQ.
So it prevents those protracted negotiations over every single price adjustment.
It speeds up the commercial process dramatically, and it preempts a lot of potential claims.
That structural use of the BOQ as a unit rate reference point is absolutely critical. It transforms what could be a fixed-sum dispute into a simple calculation of volume times rate. But for all its benefits and precision, we have to talk about its rigidity.
We do. The primary drawbacks arise because that same precision demands a significant investment and it carries a distinct liability risk. The first major disadvantage is that preparing a comprehensive, detailed BOQ is extremely time-consuming and costly.
Right.
For highly complex engineering or infrastructure projects, the production of the BOQ requires specialized quantity surveyors or engineering firms operating for many months.
Months.
Yes. This upfront investment significantly delays the project's start, and the cost of this preparation has to be borne by one of the parties.
So it's not just a quick inventory list. It's a detailed, high-stakes engineering exercise, and that delay can be a massive commercial disadvantage in fast-moving sectors.
Absolutely. And that leads to the second drawback, which is the inevitable reduced flexibility. Once you tie a fixed price to a fixed set of quantities in the BOQ, any necessary adjustment may be due to unforeseen site conditions, material constraints, or a client design modification. It requires a formal written contract renegotiation process.
So the BOQ effectively shackles the project to its initial specifications.
It does. It means that quick, pragmatic adjustments on site are often legally impossible without a complex, documented variation order. And this slows down execution considerably.
The fixed price is tied to the fixed quantity. You change one variable and you have to formally recalculate the other. Now, this leads us to the most dangerous pitfall, which I think is where the true legal risk lies, the inaccuracies.
This is the high-stakes risk. The third drawback is the inaccuracies risk. A BOQ, no matter how professionally prepared, is still an estimate. If those initial quantities are significantly incorrect, say the ground conditions require double the concrete initially estimated, it can trigger catastrophic disputes. And here's where the nuance comes in. If the client supplies the faulty BOQ, that mistake fundamentally undermines the entire premise of the contractor's fixed price.
Wait, okay, hold on. If the contractor signed a fixed price contract, why does the client's mistake matter to the fixed price? Shouldn't the contractor assume the risk of quantity estimation?
That is the critical legal distinction, and it goes directly against the conventional wisdom of fixed-price contracting. Case law in many jurisdictions establishes that if the client provides the detailed BOQ, the contractor is often deemed to have relied upon it for their bidding.
Ah, I see.
In those scenarios, the contractual risk shifts. If the quantity deviation is significant, courts or arbitration panels often rule that the fixed-price commitment is, well, it's negated because the fundamental scope provided by the client was flawed.
So the risk reverts to the client.
The risk reverts to the client, and the contractor can claim for the additional costs based on the unit rates, which is exactly what the fixed price structure was meant to avoid.
So the very mechanism designed to ensure cost certainty, the fixed price based on the BOQ, is undermined if the BOQ itself is negligently prepared by the party who is relying on that fixed price. The risk calculation itself becomes the dispute. That insight right there is what truly separates the novice from the specialist. So given that legal exposure, when do parties decide that the cost, the time, and the rigidity of a BOQ just aren't worth the trouble? Our sources identify 3 specific scenarios where omitting it is considered standard practice.
Right. First, as you might expect, in simple or small-scale projects. For a minor refurbishment or a highly repetitive work package, the cost and effort of producing a BOQ just offer marginal returns. A simple lump sum or maybe a detailed schedule of rates where the contractor simply prices common activities, that's enough because the quantity deviations are unlikely to be financially devastating.
Makes sense.
The second, and I think more interesting scenario, involves design and build or turnkey contracts.
Okay.
Here, the contractor assumes responsibility for both the design and the execution. They are promising a final functional asset, not just a quantity of materials. Since they own the design risk, they prefer to package the work into these large, high-level lump sums. For example, functional power system. They manage the internal quantities required to meet the performance specifications.
Which streamlines the client's paperwork and risk exposure.
Exactly. The client is buying an outcome, not inputs. The burden of estimation is entirely on the party best positioned to manage it, the designer and builder.
So the client's role shifts to defining performance criteria rather than auditing concrete volumes.
You've got it. And the third scenario is increasingly prevalent in modern commercial environments, agile or fast-track projects. When the scope is explicitly defined as rapidly evolving, which is common in complex IT integration or maybe early-stage development with phased design releases, a rigid BOQ is just an obstacle.
It's a hindrance.
It is. Flexibility has to be prioritized, and sticking to performance milestones and budget allocation, rather than fixed quantities, is simply the most practical approach.
Let's scale this up a bit. When we look at global standards, particularly for massive infrastructure deals, where money and risk are measured in the billions, how is the BOQ situated?
For international markets, the practice is heavily standardized. It emphasizes the common standards of engineering practice. For large infrastructure projects financed by, say, multilateral banks or international consortia, including a BOQ is often mandatory.
By mandatory.
To ensure comparability and auditability across borders and currencies, it's a way of leveling the field. The benchmark here is often FIDIAC contracts. That's the International Federation of Consulting Engineers. FIDIAC protocols clearly distinguish between different contract types. For instance, the Red Book, which is a measurement contract where the BOQ is central and the final price is determined by actual quantities measured on site. That's typically where the client provides the design.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then you have the Yellow Book, which is for design and build, and that's typically a lump sum. But here's the interesting part. Even in a Yellow Book contract, the BOQ is often included as an indicative document.
Indicative. What does that mean in this context?
It means it's there to define the basis of the lump sum, even if it doesn't strictly govern variations. This shows that the BOQ's role, it evolves based on the risk model, but its detail remains important.
So if the client is responsible for the design, the BOQ is absolutely essential for pricing accuracy and risk mitigation. But if the contractor is responsible for the design, the BOQ becomes more of an explanatory document, defining the initial cost premise.
That's a sophisticated distinction, yes. The absence of a BOQ is only really acceptable internationally when the scope definition is so meticulously defined, focusing on performance outputs and design specifications, that it completely compensates for the lack of itemized quantities.
Now let's apply this to the rapid development market of Saudi Arabia, KSA. Given the massive Vision 2030 projects happening there, what are the specific regulatory pressures?
In KSA, the context is very much defined by procurement regulations. For the public sector, the inclusion of a BOQ is almost always a statutory requirement.
A legal requirement.
A legal requirement. Saudi building code, procurement laws, auditing requirements, they all mandate this detailed breakdown. It's to ensure regulatory compliance, provide a transparent basis for bidding, and protect public funds against overruns or fraud.
So compliance with government procurement frameworks dictates precision.
It does. Conversely, in private sector projects, there is slightly more commercial freedom. You do see lump sum contracts without BOQs being used, especially in highly specialized sectors like high-tech manufacturing or rapid hospitality development, where the focus is on a fast delivery model. However, even there, because the sheer scale and the push for institutional rigor under Vision 2030, which emphasizes efficiency and transparency, including a detailed BOQ for high-value contracts, is becoming the default best practice.
So it's aligning with global FADC standards, regardless of whether it's strictly required by private contract law. Okay, let's unpack this. We've thoroughly established that the content, the BOQ, is either a crucial tool for precision or a source of rigidity and risk. But if we move past the content itself, How do we ensure the form of the contract doesn't sabotage the content? If we have all these detailed clauses, how do we prevent them from contradicting each other and creating new internal legal problems? We're moving from the microscopic detail of quantities now to the architectural blueprint of the document itself. When we talk about contract order, we mean the sequence and hierarchy of sections and clauses. For a professional who might be handed a 1,000-page contract document, this organizational element can seem purely administrative. But our sources stress that this organization has profound, often decisive legal implications.
The order is the constitution of your relationship. A logically structured contract achieves 4 vital functions that go far, far beyond mere organization. First, and most obviously, it ensures fundamental clarity and understanding. When terms are presented logically, it dramatically increases the likelihood that obligations are correctly understood by all the non-legal stakeholders.
The engineers, the project managers, the finance team.
Exactly. It ensures critical terms aren't buried deep in some irrelevant section where they might get missed. Second, the order is critical for legal interpretation and intent. In litigation or arbitration, the placement of a clause often informs the court's judgment regarding what the party's original intent was. General principles are usually grouped together, and specific, customized terms are placed prominently. If a key operational provision is inserted into the miscellaneous or boilerplate section at the back,
it could be seen as less important.
It risks being interpreted as a generalized, low-priority term, even if the parties considered it absolutely critical during negotiations.
That's a subtle but really powerful point. Placement can signal intent. But if the contract has a specific, clearly written precedence clause, which I know we'll get to, doesn't that just override the physical order of the document? Why would a judge care where a clause is located if the precedence is explicitly defined?
That's an excellent challenge. And while the precedence clause is paramount, a well-ordered document reinforces its own enforceability. A judge or an arbitrator always looks at the totality of the agreement. Poor organization can lead to the third issue, challenges to enforceability. If a contract is so chaotic that critical terms are ambiguous or contradictory before you even get to the precedence clause, a party may argue that there was no meeting of the minds in the first place, rendering those clauses unenforceable. Proper structure minimizes that ambiguity up front. And finally, the order is intrinsically linked to prioritization. When conflicts arise between, say, the main agreement text and a technical schedule in an appendix, the logical sequencing and grouping of the content help the parties quickly triage the issue. The structure itself should implicitly suggest that specific, unique provisions supersede generalized ones, even before you consult the formal precedence clause.
Okay. So within this structure, how do we distinguish the critical clauses that hold more legal weight, the ones we must negotiate and audit most closely, from the necessary but less financially destructive boilerplate?
We identify clauses based on their proximity to risk and primary obligation. Our sources confirm there are 3 pillars that are intrinsically critical because they define the object, the payment, and the exit of the relationship. Foremost is the scope of work, SOW. This defines what is delivered. But for mastery, we need to distinguish between prescriptive specifications,
which is telling the contractor how to build something, detailing materials and methods.
Right, and functional specifications,
which is telling the contractor what the final product must achieve, like capacity or throughput.
Exactly. And the SOW is critical because it dictates what constitutes successful performance. A failure to clearly delineate whether the SOW is prescriptive or functional often leads to disputes over design liability.
So if the SOW is prescriptive, the client carries the design risk. If it's functional, the contractor does. That's a massive transfer of liability that hinges entirely on the SOW language.
Precisely. Second are the payment terms. This section has to detail not just the amount, but the schedule, the triggers for payment milestones, completion criteria, and crucially, the consequences and mechanisms for delayed payment or non-payment.
It's the financial circulatory system of the project.
It is. And any ambiguity here directly impairs cash flow and heightens the risk of contract suspension. Third are the termination clauses. These are the emergency parachute. They detail both termination for convenience, which usually has a predefined payment structure, and termination for default, which requires a cure period and specific notification protocols. These clauses define the financial and operational consequences of the relationship failing, making them inherently high risk and critical to negotiate.
And these must be prioritized over foundational, though essential components like the definition section or the preamble, which give context but don't directly define the transfer of money or risk.
That's right. That hierarchy is then formalized through specific legal mechanisms. We absolutely cannot leave interpretation up to chance. The concept of hierarchy must be embedded in an explicit precedence clause that dictates unequivocally which document or clause governs in the event of a conflict.
So we're essentially giving the contract its own internal constitution, telling itself how to resolve its own disputes.
That's the perfect analogy. And a great precedence clause is a defense mechanism against a significant legal doctrine known as contra pro forentum.
Right.
This doctrine holds that when a clause is ambiguous, the interpretation must be construed against the party that drafted or proposed it. A clear precedence clause protects the drafting party by removing that ambiguity. It preempts the need for contra pro forentum to even be considered. You are contractually defining the intent. Now, beyond the foundational SOW and payment, several clauses hold particular legal significance because they define and limit catastrophic financial exposure. For instance, indemnification. This isn't just a promise to compensate, it's a negotiated agreement to defend and hold harmless against third-party claims. The scope of indemnification, whether it covers gross negligence, willful misconduct, or only standard liability, is a very high-stakes negotiation point.
And right alongside indemnification is the firewall of liability limits. This is arguably the most crucial risk allocation tool. What are the best practices for structuring these caps?
Liability limits must be meticulously drafted. Best practice often includes 3 key elements. First, a financial cap, which is typically tied to the total contract value or a percentage of the fees paid. This protects the party from infinite exposure.
Sure.
Second, specific exclusions of consequential damages, things like loss of profit, loss of revenue, or business interruption, which are often disproportionately larger than the direct damages. Excluding these non-direct losses is vital for managing commercial risk.
And the third?
The third is the explicit listing of any exceptions to the cap, such as claims arising from fraud, willful misconduct, or certain indemnification obligations. Then you have force majeure. Post-pandemic, the enforceability of these clauses has been tested globally. A strong clause has to be highly specific. It must define not just the events like specific governmental action, listed natural disasters, but also detail the consequences of the event. Extension of time, non-liability for delay, and specified financial remedies, if any.
So the boilerplate force majeure language that just mentions acts of God is now considered inadequate.
Inadequate and often legally ineffective, yes. And finally, the structural foundation, governing law and dispute resolution. These clauses determine the entire framework for enforcement. In international contracts, the choice of governing a law, English law versus New York law, for example, can completely change how indemnities or liability caps are interpreted.
And the dispute resolution section must clearly define the method.
Yes. Mediation, binding arbitration, or litigation. This is not a boilerplate choice. It dictates the speed, the cost, the confidentiality, and the finality of any resolution.
So putting this all together, the critical clauses, the risk allocation mechanisms, and the need for structural clarity, what does this standardized best practice structure look like for a complex contract?
We aim for a universally understood structure that follows a logical descent. It goes from the general concept to the specific detail, and then to the risk allocation. This is the standardized order most professional agreements follow. We always begin with the preamble introduction, which establishes the parties and the overall purpose. That's followed by a dedicated section for definitions, ensuring all technical terms are locked down. That sets the stage.
Okay.
Next comes the core operating agreement, the scope of work, followed immediately by the payment terms. Defining what you do and how you get paid are inseparable. After that, we detail the operational mechanics, the obligations of the parties, and the timeline project schedule.
That's the operational layer.
Okay.
Then comes the layer defining the legal safety nets.
Exactly, the risk layer. Risk and liability clauses covering warranties, indemnity, and liability limits. This is followed by termination procedures. The structural conclusion then locks down the framework for interaction and enforcement, governing law and jurisdiction, and finally, the miscellaneous boilerplate clauses, including the crucial entire agreement provision, notice protocols, and the dispute resolution mechanism.
And the precedence clause is always paramount.
Always. This clause must explicitly rank the various parts of the agreement. Often it places the main agreement text above the general conditions, which is above the technical specifications, which is above any informal communications. This explicit ranking is your structural insurance against internal contradiction.
It's all about that explicit ranking.
It is, and we must emphasize the need for customization. While the order is standardized, the weight of the sections has to reflect the project's core risk. In a massive construction contract, the technical specs and performance standards must be clearly defined as having high precedence. But if it's a technology licensing agreement, the IP clauses and warranties become the key focus areas for structural protection.
Right.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, even the most meticulously structured contract, perfectly ordered with an ironclad precedence clause and a precise BOQ, it still operates in the real world. It's subject to human interaction, market forces, and error. The structural defense is only as good as the operational management. So let's turn our attention now to proactive protection. What strategies can we implement both in the drafting and in the process to prevent disagreements from ever reaching the legal machinery we just spent so much time building?
This segment moves us from drafting theory to operational enforcement and relationship management. The goal isn't just to win a dispute, it's to avoid having one entirely. And the foundational defense, as always, starts with clarity in the agreements themselves.
The first step is a little counterintuitive. You have to assume your contract will one day be read by strangers during litigation.
That's a great mindset.
It forces you to define everything with absolute clarity. We must define clear terms and scope, not just broadly, but with detailed, unambiguous descriptions of deliverables and responsibilities. The more time you spend ensuring zero ambiguity, the fewer arguments you will have over subjective interpretation later.
This is where we shift the focus from simple clarity to professional precision, which means eliminating any language that permits differing interpretations.
Precisely. You have to ruthlessly avoid ambiguous language. Ambiguity in crucial clauses, especially those detailing acceptance criteria, material substitution rights, or payment milestones, is the most common root cause of commercial disputes.
So use precise, measurable adjectives and verbs.
Exactly. If a clause can be read two ways, a party under duress will inevitably choose the interpretation most beneficial to them. We must also mandate absolute payment clarity. This goes beyond just outlining the due date. It means meticulously detailing what constitutes a valid invoice, the necessary documentation for submission, the process for disputing an invoice, and the clear, measurable consequences for non-payment.
Clarity in payment is the fastest way to avoid cash flow disputes that escalate into larger claims.
It really is. And the most sophisticated element here is moving away from subjective judgment. We need the inclusion of performance metrics.
Objective data.
Absolutely. The contract must include measurable standards, key performance indicators, KPIs, and objective criteria for evaluating whether obligations are being met. This removes conflict from the realm of opinion.
I think the quality is poor.
Right, and it anchors it to verifiable data. The system only achieved 95% uptime against a 99.9% contractual requirement. These objective metrics define success and failure, and they preempt subjective argument.
So we've drafted the perfect document. But the contract is ultimately executed by people. How do we ensure relationship management and operational systems sustain the legal protections we've built?
This moves us into contract administration. First, you must establish effective and formalized communication. And this means defining not just the need for communication, but the method.
What do you mean by the method?
Which specific personnel are the authorized points of contact? Are formal notices required to be sent via registered mail, or is specific email correspondence deemed legally sufficient? Scheduling regular, mandatory progress meetings provides a structured forum to address concerns before they escalate.
Okay.
Second, we need defined internal issue resolution processes. Before a minor issue becomes a formal dispute, the contract should outline an internal escalation matrix. This could involve regular contract review sessions between project managers and legal counsel to proactively identify and resolve grievances in a timely manner. This serves as a vital pressure release valve. It prevents small operational concerns from turning into formal legal claims.
That's about catching sparks before they become a fire.
Exactly. And the third strategy is holistic. Build and maintain strong relationships. While the contract is a defense, collaboration is the prevention. This starts with vetting and partner selection, choosing reliable counterparties with established reputations for fairness. Cultivating mutual trust through transparent dealing and fair negotiations ensures that when an inevitable problem arises, the parties are willing to seek a commercial compromise rather than immediately resorting to the strict letter of the law.
Change is the enemy of the fixed-price contract. Even with the best intentions, complexity dictates that scope will shift. So, what specific clauses act as a contractual safety net to manage inevitable change and risk formally?
We use specific clauses designed to manage dynamic risk. The most critical in any project is the change control procedure. This is a defined, formal, written process for handling scope modifications. It should mandate several steps. First, a written request detailing the proposed change. Second, an impact assessment detailing the change's effect on price, schedule, and performance metrics. And third, formal approval and signature resulting in a written amendment to the contract. This prevents ad hoc, verbal agreements from leading to massive scope creep and ambiguity.
No, he said, she said.
None. Secondly, we employ notice periods for grievances and claims. These clauses require a party that believes a breach or issue has occurred to notify the counterparty within a very specific limited time frame, often 7, 14, or 30 days. This forces proactive management. If you fail to give timely notice of a delay or a claim, you often contractually forfeit the right to pursue that claim later. This prevents the strategic weaponization of silent noncompliance.
It prevents parties from stockpiling minor grievances and dropping them all at once at the end of the project.
Precisely. And finally, we require clear deadlines and extension protocols. Establishing hard deadlines for all project phases is a given, but the safety net comes from also outlining clear, detailed procedures for requesting and approving extensions, and establishing specific, quantifiable penalties or liquidated damages for missed milestones. Liquidated damages, or LDs, must be defined as a genuine, reasonable pre-estimate of loss, not as a penalty. This is key to ensuring they are legally enforceable and provide clarity regarding the financial consequences of failure.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Despite all the robust prevention built into the drafting, the process, and the specific clauses, conflict can still occur. A critical milestone is missed, a payment is delayed, or a major technical disagreement arises. One party is ready to assert a formal claim. What is the immediate non-negotiable first step?
When the alarm bell sounds, the single most critical action is immediate adherence to the contract's predefined dispute resolution procedures. This requires the contract manager to stop all reactive actions, no angry emails, no work stoppage, and consult the contract structure to identify the mandated path forward.
You have to follow the map.
You must strictly follow the structured process. If the contract mandates a tiered approach, say 30 days of direct negotiation, followed by mandatory mediation deviating from that sequence, can be fatal to your legal position, regardless of how strong your claim is. The contract is the agreed-upon map for conflict management, and the first step is always to find the map key and follow the directions exactly.
Let's pull back the curtain on those procedures a little, since our sources confirm this is the absolute first step. Why do commercial contracts typically prioritize tiered dispute resolution over immediate litigation?
It's all about expediency, cost, and specialization. Commercial contracts often specify a tiered process, moving from least confrontational to most decisive. First, direct negotiation, where senior executives attempt to resolve the issue internally. If that fails, it moves to mediation, where a neutral third party facilitates a non-binding settlement. Mediation is fast, confidential, and surprisingly successful.
And if mediation doesn't work?
If all else fails, most high-value commercial contracts, particularly internationally, specify binding arbitration rather than litigation.
And why is arbitration so preferred?
Arbitration is chosen because it allows parties to select specialized industry experts as arbitrators. This ensures the conflict is judged by people who actually understand the complex technical nature of the project, like a complex engineering dispute. Furthermore, it's generally faster, it's confidential, and the resulting awards are often easier to enforce internationally than court judgments. Prioritizing arbitration is a decision to prioritize efficiency and specialization over the public, lengthy process of litigation.
The contract must be the boss in that moment of crisis, and the dispute mechanism dictates your strategy moving forward. That was a tremendous deep dive into the architecture of commercial contracts. We move methodically from the microscopic level of the bill of quantities, assessing its role as a tool for precision versus its potential legal risk when tied to fixed price commitments. And we noted its importance in the KSA landscape.
We then explored the architectural imperative of contract structure, defining critical clauses, SOW, payment, termination, and establishing that the explicit precedence clause is the key legal defense against the doctrine of contra proferentum and internal contradiction.
The structure is the legal firewall.
It really is.
And finally, we covered the critical aspect of foresight. Dispute prevention through robust objective drafting, formalized communication processes, and the contractual safety nets of change control and notice periods. The ultimate crucial operational lesson is that when conflict hits, the first step is always to immediately adhere to the contract's prescribed, often tiered, dispute resolution procedures.
For you, the listener, the synthesis is clear. Achieving mastery in commercial contract management is about balancing technical precision, which is your BOQ data, structural clarity, the order and precedence, and operational foresight, which is prevention. The entire contract structure is a sophisticated, interlinked machine. It's designed both to meticulously define risk and to resolve conflict efficiently and confidentially when that risk inevitably materializes.
That leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you integrate this knowledge. Our source material confirms that the first step when a dispute arises is to follow the contract's dispute resolution procedures. Given the technical and commercial complexity of your projects, do your contracts prioritize binding arbitration for its speed and specialization, or do they default to litigation? If your default is litigation, consider the cost, the time, and the lack of confidentiality that choice imposes. Understanding the commercial consequences of that foundational dispute choice is the final step toward true contract mastery, something for you to mull over as you seek to bulletproof your next agreement. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is to take stacks of really complex documentation. We're talking legal precedents, risk management frameworks, all those operational guidelines, and just synthesize them into pure, highly actionable insight that you can put to use immediately. Today, we're diving deep into the architecture of resilience. And this isn't about, hoping things go right. It's about preparing for when they inevitably go sideways. We are focusing on how to manage and mitigate risks before a contract is even signed, and then, of course, during its entire life cycle. So essentially, we are looking at how you truly bulletproof an organization against the inevitable bumps or, even those catastrophic collisions that happen when you're relying on partners, vendors, and suppliers. Okay, let's unpack this. Our source materials lay out this brilliant, interconnected, three-part framework for achieving this contractual mastery. First, we're going to establish the crucial step-by-step process for dispute resolution for when things go wrong.
The cleanup crew.
The cleanup crew, exactly. Understanding that hierarchy of conflict. Second, we will dissect the essential clauses needed to protect your organization financially and, of course, legally.
That's the armor plating.
That's the contractual armor plating, covering everything from liability caps all the way to exit ramps. And third, and this is maybe the most critical part, we're going to master the proactive art of contingency planning.
The ultimate plan B.
The ultimate structured plan B that operates completely outside the four corners of the agreement. So you're asking, what are the biggest pressure points in contract management, and how do we turn these potential disasters into manageable processes that can actually, maybe, deliver a competitive advantage?
That is precisely the challenge we are tackling today. And, it aligns perfectly with the goal here, to gain profound knowledge quickly but thoroughly, and to do it without that sense of information overload. We really need to move past the standard definitions and focus on strategic choice. Our goal is to synthesize this whole hierarchy of preparedness, understanding that, successful organizations don't just draft contracts.
Right.
They prepare for every possible permutation of success and failure. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, operational resilience is the true metric of success. A contract, at the end of the day, is just a piece of paper, unless you've already defined the path for when performance lapses, or the economy collapses,
or a natural disaster hits.
Exactly. We're moving beyond mere legal obligation and into a comprehensive blueprint for operational survival.
Let's start at that moment of rupture, when an agreement fractures, a deadline is missed, or a core deliverable is just subpar. Before the panic sets in, before litigation seems like the only option, there is a foundational first step.
And it's one organizations often overlook in the heat of the moment, precisely because they are panicking.
Our sources emphasize that the resolution process actually starts years before the dispute even arises. The very first step, that critical moment of clarity, is always to review the contract's clauses. You don't have to invent a solution, you just have to read the map that you already signed off on.
And that review is so much more than just checking the definition of a breach. A professional contract, a good one, dictates the entire roadmap for resolution. It includes time limits, notice requirements.
The specific method of communication, right?
The specific method, yes. If the contract says you must send notice via certified mail to the CEO's private office, and you just fire off an email to the project manager,
you could be in real trouble.
You could jeopardize your entire legal standing just by failing to follow the agreed-upon procedure. The details there are absolutely paramount. So once the breach is confirmed and the notice is properly delivered, the agreed-upon track starts with phase one, amicable efforts. The preference, codified right in the contract, should always be to resolve issues through negotiation and amicable settlement.
Why is that always the first step?
Well, it saves money, it preserves relationships, and it allows for creative, business-focused solutions that a court could never, ever mandate.
I think the key here, which often gets lost, is that amicable part. This isn't about just sending accusatory emails back and forth.
Yeah, not at all.
It requires establishing a clear communication channel specifically designed to identify common ground and seek out mutually acceptable solutions. The mindset has to be reconciliation, or at least a managed separation, not immediate confrontation.
Absolutely. The goal is to move the conversation away from proving fault and toward repairing the commercial relationship. You're trying to find a cure for the breach.
But what happens when that stalls?
Well, direct talks frequently stall, especially if the breach is financially significant or it involves, say, reputation damage. If they fail, the contract should have already anticipated this by specifying a detailed escalation process.
So it's like a built-in ladder.
Exactly. A robust escalation clause specifies clear timelines and defines the levels of authority the issue must ascend through. It often means moving the issue from the operational managers, who might be too close to the technical argument.
Right, they're in the weeds.
They're in the weeds. You move it up to senior management or even to a pre-established steering committee made up of executive leaders from both organizations.
And why is that move so critical?
It brings in fresh eyes, political capital, and crucially, the authority needed to approve concessions or budget adjustments that can break a deadlock. A good escalation clause forces those decision makers to the table within a fixed period, say 10 business days, before the dispute metastasizes.
Okay, so if internal negotiation and that executive escalation don't work, we move into phase 2. This is the strategic domain of alternative dispute resolution, or ADR.
This is where organizations consciously try to avoid the cost and the publicity of the traditional court system.
And the first tool in the ADR kit is mediation.
Right.
In mediation, you introduce a neutral third party, the mediator. Now, crucially, the mediator doesn't judge, they don't decide the case, and they definitely don't assign blame.
No, their role is completely different. They act as an honest broker, helping the parties communicate their underlying interests, not just their legal positions, and understand each other's financial constraints. The whole aim is to guide the parties toward a mutually acceptable resolution.
So it's collaborative.
It's highly collaborative, and it's often preferred early on, especially if the parties actually intend to continue doing business after the dispute is resolved. It's non-binding.
Non-binding, that's a key word.
A very key word. The parties retain complete control over the outcome. If mediation fails, nothing has been sacrificed. The parties can still pursue litigation or arbitration. It's a low-risk environment designed for creative problem-solving and, most importantly, preserving that commercial relationship.
But if that collaborative approach fails, we step up the formality considerably to arbitration. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because arbitration is a major strategic choice, and it has high stakes.
It does. It's more formal than mediation, but it's far less rigid than litigation. It takes place in a private forum, not a public courtroom. You have an arbitrator, or maybe a panel of them, acting essentially as a private judge who reviews evidence and hears arguments.
But the critical difference, and our sources highlight this over and over, is that the arbitrator's decision is typically binding.
That's the game changer. Binding means the decision is legally enforceable and usually final, with extremely limited grounds for appeal. Those appeals are often restricted only to procedural error, not an error of law.
So it's fast.
Incredibly efficient. It's much faster, often resolved in months, not years, and generally less expensive than going to court.
Okay, I have to push back on that for a minute. That speed sounds great, but doesn't binding arbitration mean you sacrifice your fundamental right to appeal, even if the arbitrator makes a clear legal mistake or, I don't know, misinterprets a state statute? Isn't that a huge risk for a major multi-million-dollar contract?
It is absolutely a major strategic risk, and it's one of the key trade-offs you negotiate right up front in the contract. When you select binding arbitration, you're essentially trading that due process certainty for speed and privacy.
So what does that trade-off look like in practice?
Well, for instance, in arbitration, the discovery phase, where both sides gather mountains of evidence, is usually severely limited compared to litigation. This cuts costs dramatically, but it also means you might not uncover that one smoking gun document.
I see. So there are pros and cons.
Definitely. Organizations often choose arbitration for disputes involving complex technical details, like, say, software or construction standards. because they can select arbitrators who are experts in that specific field. That's something a generalist judge might not be.
But you have to be ready to live with the outcome.
You must be prepared to accept finality, even if the outcome feels legally imperfect. Understanding the efficiency gains of binding arbitration is key, but so is acknowledging that risk of limited recourse.
And finally, when negotiation, mediation, and arbitration have all been exhausted, we reluctantly enter phase 3, litigation as a last resort, formal court proceedings. And if the dispute reaches this stage, the costs will spiral, the timeline extends potentially for years, and the relationship is, well, it's almost certainly irreparably damaged.
And this is where a mandatory requirement comes into play that should have been addressed years earlier. The contract must specify the governing law and jurisdiction where the dispute will be resolved.
These two terms get confused all the time. Can you break that down for us?
Yes, and it's a critical distinction. Governing law defines which rules apply, the body of statutes and precedents that will be used to interpret the contract. For example, this contract shall be governed by the laws of the state of Delaware.
Okay, so that's the what. What's the where?
That's jurisdiction. Jurisdiction defines which court hears the case, the specific geographic location and court system where the dispute will be filed. For example, the parties agree to submit to the exclusive jurisdiction of the state and federal courts located in Dallas County, Texas.
And if you don't specify both?
If you fail to specify both, you remove any ambiguity about where and under what rules you will fight. Without that clarity, parties can engage in these costly legal battles merely over where to fight. It's called a jurisdictional challenge, wasting immense time and resources before the actual substance of the dispute is even addressed.
So you're fighting about fighting.
You're fighting about fighting, exactly. Pinpointing exactly where you'll fight the battle and whose rules you'll fight under provides immediate certainty right when certainty is most needed.
That makes perfect sense. Now, running parallel to all three of these phases, from the first polite email all the way through to the final courtroom appearance, is this critical overarching requirement. Document the process record keeping.
Yes, this can't be stressed enough.
Our materials are so emphatic on this. Detailed records of all communications, all meeting minutes, all proposals for corrective action, and every single action taken during the dispute resolution process are absolutely essential. If you propose a solution to cure a breach, you document it. If the other party rejects it, you document the rejection and the reason why. You're building a chronological narrative of good faith.
Exactly. And that documentation transforms a subjective argument into objective fact, which is your ultimate defense shield. You need to capture not only what was said, but all the metadata, who said it, when they said it, and through what channel.
So when you stand before an arbitrator or a judge,
When you do, your ability to prove due diligence, good faith efforts, clear communication, and reasonable attempts at settlement, all of it backed by time-stamped records, that can make the difference between winning and losing.
it's about showing you followed the process.
It's about showing you followed the process. This includes documenting instances where the counterparty ignored an agreed-upon escalation step or refused mediation. It proves that you followed the contractually agreed-upon map while they deviated, and that strengthens your position immensely, even if the underlying facts of the breach are a little murky.
Okay, so moving from that reactive dispute management to proactive defense, we enter Section 2, building the contractual armor plating.
Right?
Preventing disputes is obviously the ideal, but these protective clauses ensure the organization is insulated and financially protected if a dispute or a breach does occur. We'll explore 5 main strategies, starting with the core financial shields designed to cap your downside exposure.
When you're drafting, you must always be looking for opportunities to transfer or limit risk. And that starts with strategy 1, favorable terms and conditions. The first and often the most heavily negotiated shield is the limitation of liability clause, the LOL clause.
And this is purely defensive.
Purely defensive. Its purpose is to define and cap the organization's financial exposure in case of a breach, protecting you against excessive, unpredictable claims that could cripple the business.
Let's get granular here, because a simple cap isn't enough, is it? Our sources highlight that the most crucial element in an LOL clause is often the distinction between direct damages and consequential damages. Why is excluding consequential damages so non-negotiable for most organizations, especially suppliers?
That's a fundamental distinction. Direct damages are the easily quantifiable costs that flow directly from the breach. For example, the cost of replacing a faulty widget. Simple math.
Okay.
Consequential damages, however, are indirect. They are the economic ripple effects of the failure. like lost profits, loss of business opportunity, interruption to global operations, or reputational harm. And these damages can easily multiply the cost of the direct breach by a factor of 10 or 50 or even more.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. If you are a software vendor and your system fails, your direct liability might be the cost of fixing the software, maybe $100,000.
Yeah.
But if that failure shuts down your client's entire international supply chain for a week,
Oh, wow.
the consequential damages, the lost revenue and the business interruption, could run into the tens of millions. By explicitly excluding consequential damages, you cap your exposure to the direct cost, which allows you to price your services competitively without having to carry ruinous insurance for every worst-case operational scenario of your client.
And what about the actual financial cap? Is there a standard practice for that?
The cap is always negotiated, but a standard practice often sets the limit at the total amount paid under the contract. So the cumulative fees over the contract term, or perhaps a multiple like 1.5 or 2 times the annual fees.
But you can't just cap everything, can you?
No, and that's a great point. You must also define what are called carve-outs. A good LOL clause should almost always state that the liability cap does not apply to certain really serious issues. Usually fraud, willful misconduct, breaches of confidentiality, or indemnity claims related to third-party IP infringement.
Makes sense. If you commit fraud, you shouldn't be protected by a cap you drafted.
Precisely. These carve-outs ensure the clause is defensible and holds up against claims that it's unconscionable.
Right. And hand in hand with limiting your own liability, you want to ensure the other party takes full financial responsibility for their actions. And that's achieved through robust indemnification clauses.
Yes, these clauses are the true risk transfer mechanism.
They stipulate that the other party agrees to compensate or hold harmless your organization for losses, damages, or legal liabilities arising from their specific actions, negligence, or breaches.
The classic example is the third-party lawsuit. Suppose you hire a marketing firm, and they use copyrighted material without permission in your new campaign. The original copyright holder then sues your organization.
So you get sued for something they did.
Exactly. The indemnification clause ensures that the marketing firm, the party who actually caused the IP infringement, will cover your legal fees, the cost of any settlement, and any damages awarded.
So what makes a good indemnification clause?
Clarity on the triggers. Is it triggered by negligence, a breach of warranty, a failure to comply with regulatory standards, or a specific third-party claim? The scope has to be meticulously defined, and indemnification is often one of the few liabilities that is carved out from the limitation of liability cap.
Meaning it's often uncapped.
Meaning the responsibility to indemnify is often uncapped.
Yes. And strategy 1 is rounded out by warranties and guarantees. These aren't just, pleasant assurances. They are legal commitments regarding the quality and performance of the deliverable.
That's right. They ensure the quality, the functionality, and the compliance of the work being delivered against agreed-upon standards.
So if you're contracting for a new IT system, the warranty guarantees the system will perform to the specific technical specification, operate without material error for a defined period, and comply with all applicable regulations.
Then that protects your organization against receiving substandard or non-compliant work, and it provides clear legal recourse if the deliverable fails.
Okay, moving to our second strategy, which focuses entirely on structural integrity and exit management, clarity and exit ramps.
This begins with specificity and roles and responsibilities, and the sources are crystal clear on this. You must stress the necessity to avoid vague statements. Ambiguity is the enemy of contract management. It's the fuel for future disputes.
So duties have to be explicit, measurable, and defined to leave absolutely no room for interpretation.
Zero room.
We need to move beyond saying something like, the contractor will provide reasonable support. What should a strong clause look like?
It should look like a statement of work with military-grade precision. So instead of, the supplier will assist with integration, a robust clause says something like, the supplier will provide 2 dedicated senior engineers with certifications A, B, and C for 160 hours per month commencing October 1st to execute integration tasks defined by milestones 3.1 and 3.2.
Wow, that's specific.
It has to be. Failure to assign personnel with the specified certifications constitutes a material breach. That level of detail drastically reduces the likelihood of non-performance being excused by misinterpretation, and it makes non-compliance really easy to prove.
And when those specific performance metrics fail, you need a predefined way out. That's where termination clauses come in.
Exactly. A well-defined clause specifies the conditions under which your organization can terminate the contract without facing penalties.
When negotiating termination, we really need to focus on two distinct types, right? Termination for cause and termination for convenience. What's the strategic difference between those two?
Termination for cause is your defense mechanism. It's triggered by the counterparty's failure to meet specific, defined conditions, like consistent failure to meet service-level agreements, or SLAs, bankruptcy, or a material breach of confidentiality. This is often the immediate legal recourse when the relationship collapses due to the other party's fault.
So that's reactive. What about termination for convenience?
Termination for convenience is a strategic tool. It allows your organization to exit the contract for commercial reasons that have nothing to do with the other party's performance. Maybe your business strategy shifted, the project is no longer viable, or you simply found a better supplier.
Is there a penalty for that?
Usually, yes. This termination often requires you to pay the counterparty a pre-agreed termination fee to cover their sunk costs. But it provides essential flexibility, ensuring you aren't locked into a partnership that no longer serves your strategic goals.
Our third strategy focuses on addressing external, uncontrollable risks via strong risk management clauses. The one everyone became intimately familiar with during the last few years is, of course, force majeure. This clause clarifies that your organization is excused from liability or penalties if unforeseen, defined events make it impossible, or, and this is a key change, commercially impracticable, to fulfill contractual obligations.
Historically, this meant acts of God, earthquakes, hurricanes. But the modern definition has expanded considerably. The critical element now is specificity. If your contract doesn't explicitly name an event, a court may not recognize it as a force majeure event. So following the pandemic, smart contracts now specifically list epidemics, public health emergencies, governmental travel restrictions, severe labor shortages due to regional illness.
And even cyber attacks.
And sometimes even specific types of severe cyber attacks that disable critical national infrastructure. Yes. This is crucial for navigating global supply chain issues or prolonged geopolitical instability.
But it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card.
No, and that's a common mistake. People think force majeure completely excuses performance. Often, it merely suspends performance for a period. And typically, if the event lasts too long, say over 90 or 180 days, the other party then gains the right to terminate the contract. It's a temporary shield, not a permanent escape hatch.
Okay. Furthermore, under this strategy, we have to include insurance requirements. This is the pragmatic, often overlooked financial layer of defense.
Yes. This clause ensures that both parties maintain appropriate and sufficient insurance coverage to cover potential risks associated with the contract.
And we're not just talking about standard commercial general liability or CGL.
No, not at all. Depending on the nature of the contract, say you're handling vast amounts of customer data, you must demand the counterparty maintain specific high-limit cyber liability insurance. If it's a construction project, you need surety bonds and builder's risk coverage.
And what's the real benefit here?
The insurance clause provides a third line of financial defense. It ensures that if a claim exceeds your limitation of liability cap, there is still an institutional financial backing available to cover the loss. And a crucial detail here is requiring that the counterparty name your organization as an additional insured on their policy.
Why is that so important?
It gives you direct rights to access their policy if their negligence causes you a loss. You don't have to wait for them to make a claim.
Moving to strategy 4. Performance assurance. These are clauses that provide concrete financial backstops to guarantee performance, essential when the counterparty's reliable delivery is mission critical. The first is performance bonds.
These bonds are generally required in construction, high-value manufacturing, or major government contracts where a financial default or a failure to complete the project would just be catastrophic.
So how does a performance bond work?
A performance bond is essentially a guarantee from a third-party insurer, called the surety, to your organization. It says that if the contractor fails to meet contract requirements, say they go bankrupt mid-project, the surety will step in to cover the financial cost of completing the project or finding a replacement contractor.
It's like insurance against default.
It is, and it's different from a bank letter of credit because the surety conducts its own due diligence on the contractor's financial stability before even issuing the bond. This adds an extra layer of confidence in the supplier's ability to perform.
And we also look at guarantee clauses, which are direct assurances from the supplier regarding the quality and durability of the deliverable.
Right. So if you buy specialized industrial equipment, the supplier guarantees that the work will meet certain standards for, say, 5 years. If the product fails within that guarantee period due to poor workmanship, they are contractually obligated to fix it, replace it, or compensate the loss.
So a bond covers default, a guarantee covers quality.
Precisely. A guarantee covers the quality and longevity of the product itself, ensuring you receive compliant and functional work that lasts.
Finally, Strategy 5 addresses the protection of intangible but often most valuable assets, intellectual property and information security. This begins with defining intellectual property IP rights.
In any project involving innovation, custom creation, or technology transfer like developing custom software, new designs, proprietary processes, the contract must clearly state who owns what.
So if your organization commissions custom code, who owns the underlying copyright and who owns the integration rights?
The contract must explicitly address the work-for-hire doctrine, clearly assigning ownership to the organization paying for the work. Without this crystal-clear assignment of IP, including rights to software code, data models, or patents disputes over ownership, can be incredibly costly. It could potentially hinder future business opportunities that rely on that IP.
And this brings us to the bedrock of information protection, confidentiality clauses, NDAs. These protect the sensitive information that will inevitably be shared: trade secrets, client lists, or internal strategy. A crucial detail for you, the listener, to internalize. Our sources stress the need for these clauses to extend beyond the contract's term. If the contract ends after 2 years and the NDA expires right along with it, a former partner could immediately use or disclose your proprietary information.
That's a critical point. The relationship may end, but the proprietary information shared during that relationship remains sensitive indefinitely. Therefore, the NDA must explicitly state that confidentiality obligations survive termination, often for 5 years, 10 years, or even in perpetuity for things like trade secrets.
So that survival clause is key.
Securing that indefinite survival clause is vital for maintaining your competitive edge and ensuring the leakage of proprietary information doesn't occur the moment the commercial relationship concludes.
We've spent a lot of time building an ironclad contract and defining how to resolve disputes with the counterparty. But what happens when the risk isn't from the vendor, but from a massive, unforeseen external event?
Right. A regional power grid failure, a global pandemic shutdown, a natural disaster that cripples a logistics hub. This is where we move beyond the contract itself and into the realm of proactive preparedness, contingency planning.
This shift is crucial. We've moved from defense to true resilience. Let's define what we mean by a contingency plan in this context.
The contingency plan is the detailed, proactive strategy designed to prepare an organization for unexpected, high-impact events that might disrupt operations. You can think of it as the overarching framework that encompasses more specific plans like disaster recovery or DR and business continuity (BC).
So it's the master plan.
It is. It outlines a structured, executive-approved approach for risk mitigation, damage minimization, and swift recovery when the worst happens. And this planning is essential because it addresses risks that contractual clauses alone just cannot fix.
What kind of risks are we talking about here?
We're talking about unforeseen circumstances like major data breaches or critical supply chain interruptions that stop production globally. We look at financial risks, like sudden budget overruns or market collapses. And we cover operational risks, which might include technology failures, the loss of a key facility, or a sudden severe resource shortage.
So a well-crafted plan prepares an organization for a whole spectrum of worst-case scenarios and ensures critical operations can continue with minimal disruption. This sounds incredibly complex, but our sources provide a remarkably clear, systematic framework, an 8-step cycle for developing this plan. Let's walk through the visualized cycle, detailing the practical steps. The cycle starts with step 1, identify key risks. It's risk assessment. You have to identify all potential internal and external risks that could affect the project or even the organization's survival. You can't mitigate what you haven't seen.
And this step demands structure. You can't just brainstorm on a whiteboard. You should use tools like a risk matrix, which is typically a 5x5 grid that prioritizes risks based on the likelihood of them occurring, from rare to almost certain, and their potential impact, from insignificant to catastrophic.
And the high likelihood, high impact risks become your top priorities.
They immediately jump to the top of the list. And it's vital to systematically distinguish between internal risks issues related to technology failures, human errors, things within your control, and external risks, factors like economic changes, political instability, severe supply chain disruptions, or new regulatory shifts. Risk assessment has to be holistic, looking both inward at your own vulnerabilities and outward at geopolitical or climate threats.
Okay, step 2. Determine critical functions and priorities. Once you know the risks, you have to identify which areas of the business or project are non-negotiable. What must remain operational at all costs?
This involves establishing performance metrics for recovery. Organizations use metrics like Recovery Time Objective, or RTO, which defines the maximum tolerable duration of system downtime after a failure.
And Recovery Point Objective.
And Recovery Point Objective, RPO, which defines the maximum amount of data loss the organization can tolerate. If your core manufacturing has to be back online within 4 hours, an RTO of 4 hours, that immediately defines the resources needed for that specific function. You have to focus intensely on critical dependencies. Which technologies, suppliers, or key staff are absolutely vital for those core functions to continue in an emergency.
Step 3 is to develop actionable responses. For every high-priority risk you identified in Step 1, you need a specific, defined, written-out response strategy.
The plan must define the steps taken if a risk materializes, and it usually follows 4 general response strategies. First is avoidance, which means eliminating the risk altogether, like exiting a risky market. Second is mitigation, where you reduce the severity or likelihood, like securing backup suppliers in 3 different continents.
And the third?
The third is transfer, which shifts the risk to another party, often through specialized insurance or outsourcing. And the final one is acceptance, where you acknowledge the risk but decide to proceed anyway, often with specific contingencies already in place to handle the fallout.
Can you give an example of acceptance?
Sure. A company might accept the risk of localized power outages because the cost of installing a full backup power plant exceeds the risk impact, but they will have battery backups for immediate data saving.
And for every one of these, the plan has to stipulate.
Crucially, for every defined risk, the plan must clearly stipulate who is responsible for executing the response, what resources will be required, and how the issue is communicated. A vague plan that just says, IT will fix the servers, is a guaranteed failure. A good plan says, Jane Smith, the IT team lead, will activate the Azure failover procedure within 30 minutes of system failure.
Specificity again. Step 4. Allocate resources. A detailed plan is just expensive shelfware if it isn't funded and resourced. You have to ensure sufficient resources are allocated before the emergency.
This requires dedicated financial planning, setting aside a specific contingency budget to cover unexpected costs. It demands rigorous personnel planning, ensuring team members are cross-trained and assigned specific, clear roles for emergencies. And finally, material resources must be secured, like backup equipment or off-site data centers. Resource readiness is the true test of commitment.
Step 5 is to establish a communication plan. When a crisis hits, chaos is avoided only through clear, rapid, and structured communication.
And your standard communication hierarchy will likely be broken, so you need redundant channels. The plan must identify all key stakeholders, internal and external, and define the message for each.
So for internal staff?
For internal communication, staff need to know their exact roles and who they report to using a redundant channel, like a specialized emergency SMS system, not just office email. And for external stakeholders, you must pre-draft statements for clients regarding service disruption and define who, usually the legal or PR team, is authorized to speak to the media. Clarity prevents speculation and reputation damage.
Step 6 requires us to validate the plan. Train staff and conduct drills. You can't just write it and forget it. Practice is essential.
Absolutely. This involves holding regular training sessions and workshops. But more importantly, it requires conducting mock drills, realistic exercises like data breach simulations, IT system recovery drills, or full disaster recovery simulations that assume the primary office is inaccessible.
And how often should these happen?
The sources suggest a minimum frequency of conducting full simulations annually or biannually, depending on the severity of the risks your organization faces. And you need scenario diversity. Don't just test a single-point failure. Test a cascading failure.
What do you mean by that?
What if the server farm fails and the lead vendor supplying the backup equipment is simultaneously shut down by a force majeure event? Testing how your teams handle those overlapping dependencies is the mark of a truly mature plan.
Step 7. Review and update the plan regularly. Risks, technologies, project goals, they're not static. They evolve constantly.
So you must constantly monitor changing conditions. This means staying updated on external factors like new regulatory standards or geopolitical shifts. And critically, after every drill or real-life application, you must hold a robust postmortem to incorporate lessons learned. Review the plan's effectiveness, identify the gaps, and adjust based on that experience. This ensures the plan remains a living, relevant blueprint.
And finally, Step 8 addresses a key mitigating factor, especially for technology-dependent organizations: backup systems and data.
This is fundamental to mitigating IT-related risks, and it needs explicit detailing in the plan. It requires establishing policies for regular data backup to geographically dispersed cloud or off-site servers. Furthermore, the plan must define the structure of your disaster recovery systems.
So are you using a cold site, a warm site, a hot site?
Exactly. A cold site is just a location, it's slow to set up. A warm site is equipped with hardware, so it's faster. Or a hot site, which has mirrored operations for a near-instant switchover. The choice you make dictates the RTO you defined back in Step 2.
That is an incredibly robust 8-step framework, covering everything from initial risk identification to post-event review. But this raises an important question. We've all seen meticulously crafted documents that end up sitting on a shelf just gathering dust. How do we ensure this plan isn't just shelfware? How do we guarantee execution success when the sirens actually sound?
Indeed, success relies entirely on execution, and our sources provide 6 critical steps to guarantee that the plan is viable, actionable, and truly integrated into the organizational culture when it's needed most.
So where do we start?
The first is absolutely fundamental: secure top management buy-in. Leadership involvement is non-negotiable. Senior management must not only be involved in developing and reviewing the plan, but critically, they must approve the allocation of resources, time, money, people.
So it's not just a rubber stamp.
No. That buy-in signals to the entire organization that resilience is a strategic priority, not just some optional compliance exercise.
I've seen countless plans fail because leadership treats it as a check-the-box exercise. They toss a budget line item at it and then walk away. What's the single red flag, the clearest sign that management isn't genuinely committed?
The clearest red flag is the failure to budget for or participate in regular testing. If leadership approves the document but refuses to allocate the time, money, and operational disruption required for mock drills, they are communicating that recovery is not important enough to interrupt the day-to-day business. That sends a lethal message to the operational teams responsible for executing the plan.
The second step is demanding clear roles and responsibilities. This is about accountability at all levels. Ambiguity of roles in a crisis is fatal.
This clarity has to extend to both high-level decision-makers and the on-the-ground responders. Who declares the emergency? Who has the authority to spend the contingency budget? Accountability must be clearly assigned for every granular task, like securing alternative supplies or managing external communications. A crisis command center needs a clear hierarchy to function under pressure.
Okay, step 3 is the testing component. Test the plan regularly. We mentioned drills earlier, but here we emphasize that testing is the primary tool for continuous improvement.
Regular simulations and real-life scenario testing are critical to identifying gaps or weaknesses in the plan before a real crisis exposes them, and that is far cheaper and less reputationally damaging.
And there are different ways to test.
Yes, testing should use different formats. A tabletop exercise involves key decision makers just discussing the plan's procedures in a meeting room, testing communication flows. A full simulation involves physically activating backup systems, moving personnel, and testing external vendor responses. The latter measures response time and logistical feasibility directly.
Step 4 is crucial for ongoing maturity. Review and revise. This ties back to that concept of continuous improvement. After each test or real-world event, you must hold a debrief session to evaluate the plan's effectiveness, what worked, what failed, and why.
And you must stay current by revising the plan whenever new risks emerge, technologies change, or major organizational shifts occur. If you onboard a major new platform, acquire a new supplier, or expand to a high-risk political region, the contingency plan has to reflect that change instantly, integrating the new dependencies and risks into the existing framework.
Step 5 addresses the undeniable fact that no disaster unfolds exactly as planned. Build flexibility into the plan.
A contingency plan has to avoid rigidity. It must empower responders to make judgment calls and adapt the response strategies as the situation evolves unpredictably.
So it's more of a framework than a script.
Exactly. For instance, if the plan mandates using supplier A as the backup, but supplier A is also unexpectedly offline, the plan should provide a framework for the response team to rapidly vet and onboard supplier B without waiting for executive sign-off, provided the expenditure stays within pre-approved emergency limits. Flexibility means empowering people to lead recovery, not just follow a script.
And finally, step 6, which elevates contingency planning from an isolated exercise to a core organizational function. Integrate the contingency plan into the business strategy.
Ensuring the plan is aligned with the organization's broader strategic goals and the overall risk management framework provides essential context. If the business strategy prioritizes customer retention above all else, then the contingency plan's RTOs and resource allocation should reflect that, prioritizing customer service systems over, say, internal administrative functions.
So it's not just an IT or operations plan?
No. This integration makes the plan a central pillar of organizational resilience, directly contributing to competitive advantage, not just an expense line item.
We've covered a massive amount of territory today, moving seamlessly from the tactical language of contracts to the strategic demands of operational preparedness. Let's quickly synthesize the core takeaways from this deep dive. We established that dispute resolution is a defined ladder. It starts always with meticulously reviewing the contract and triggering amicable negotiation and controlled escalation. When that fails, we favored the efficiency of alternative dispute resolution, moving from collaborative mediation to binding arbitration, and finally, reluctantly, to litigation as the last resort.
All underpinned by rigorous record-keeping.
All underpinned by rigorous record-keeping that tells the story of your good faith. And crucially, we clarified that essential difference between governing law and jurisdiction. We then built the contractual armor plating. Contract protection is proactive defense, relying on clauses that limit your financial exposure via limitation of liability, specifically excluding those consequential damages and defining carve-outs. It transfers risk via indemnification, secures strategic exit ramps via termination clauses, both for cause and convenience, and it mitigates external shocks via a modern, specific force majeure clause.
And don't forget the survival clauses.
And critically, we emphasize the necessity of ensuring IP and confidentiality clauses extend beyond the contract's term. And finally, we mastered structure preparedness through contingency planning. This is the proactive Plan B, driven by that 8-step cycle from risk assessment and prioritization using metrics like R2O to actionable responses and testing.
And success depends on execution.
We saw that success depends not on the quality of the document itself, but on its execution, secured by top management buy-in and regular, realistic testing against those cascading failure scenarios. Preparedness is not merely compliance. It is a profound competitive advantage in a world defined by instability and unexpected risk.
We discussed the importance of defining governing law and jurisdiction in a contract early on to prevent future procedural disputes. But consider this final provocative thought. If a contract specifies arbitration as binding and final, the true contingency plan may not be legal jurisdiction at all, but instead the maintenance of political and economic goodwill with the counterparty throughout the dispute. If the relationship itself is your most valuable asset, does an ironclad legal defense, however well documented, ever truly succeed if the underlying partnership is entirely destroyed by the conflict it was meant to resolve?
So you win the battle but lose the war.
This is something for you to mull over. Are you optimizing for legal victory, or are you optimizing for enduring commercial resilience?
That's a powerful distinction. Optimizing for the lawsuit versus optimizing for the enduring relationship. We hope this deep dive into contractual protection and contingency planning gives you the comprehensive, actionable tools to approach your agreements not just as legal documents, but as comprehensive blueprints for resilience. Thank you for joining us, and we encourage you to apply this knowledge immediately to your own agreements and start building that proactive Plan B. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your essential source material, the technical manuals, the dense research, and we give you that deep understanding you need without you having to wade through all of it yourself.
Today, we are taking a massive swing at what a lot of people see as the core tension in contract management, especially in, the capital-intensive world of construction and property development. We are diving into two crucial but really distinct pillars.
For sure.
How to maintain absolute financial stability, and at the same time, how to uphold just unflinching professional integrity.
Exactly. And this isn't just about, spreadsheets on one side and a moral code on the other existing separately.
Right.
It's about how they depend on each other. And even if your professional life doesn't involve pouring concrete or negotiating leases, understanding how cash flow works on a huge years-long project.
Yeah.
And the ethical frameworks that ensure trust. I mean, those are keys to managing any complex venture. This deep dive really is about the difference between a project that sinks its owner in unexpected costs and one that, soars on a foundation of trust and really accurate planning.
Our mission today is to equip you with a structured, step-by-step understanding. We've got two very different stacks of information from you. The first is intensely practical, almost mechanical.
Yeah.
It's a 12-point checklist for preparing an accurate cash flow forecast in these really complex, high-stakes construction environments.
And the second stack is, it's foundational. It's the core ethical principles that create that environment of trust we were talking about.
Right.
Specifically, we'll be using the global codified rules from the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, the RICS, that guide professional conduct. We are essentially mapping the financial structure and the moral compass.
And showing why the second one protects the first.
Yeah.
When we look at the broader context here of optimizing cash flow and avoiding costly problems,
Right.
which is the ultimate goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
The source material identifies 7 key strategies. These are accurate cash flow forecasting, efficient invoicing, effective expense management, strategic cash reserves,
Okay.
streamlined project management, collaborative relationships with stakeholders, and, of course, utilizing technology.
That's a whole ecosystem of management right there. But if you look at that list, I mean, the one that is the most technically challenging,
Yeah.
the one that demands the deepest dive into precision and sort of predictive analysis is that very first one, accurate cash flow forecasting.
Without a doubt.
I mean, if you mess up the forecast, if your timeline is off or your costs are misaligned, the other 6 points like efficient invoicing or maintaining reserves, they just become exponentially harder to execute.
You're just reacting at that point, not planning.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Starting with the money side of things. We need to understand how we take a static budget, which tells us the total cost, and turn it into a dynamic financial blueprint.
A living document.
Right, a living document that anticipates cash shortfalls and plans for trouble long before the invoices actually hit the desk.
That is the perfect way to frame it, because that transformation is the whole point. A static budget is, it's historical or theoretical. It just tells you this building will cost $50 million, period.
Single number.
A single number. A cash flow forecast, on the other hand, tells you when that $50 million has to move, month by month, even week by week.
And crucially,
it lets you anticipate those dreaded negative periods.
when you're spending more than you're taking in.
Exactly, when your outflows exceed your inflows. And if you can see that coming, you can pre-plan for funding, whether that's drawing from reserves, negotiating an overdraft, or securing some specific financing. It makes the cost data dynamic.
So where does this structured process kick off? The source lays out a very clear approach, starting with phase 1, which it calls defining the project skeleton.
Absolutely. The foundational starting point is step 7.1. Define the project timeline.
The absolute first step.
The absolute non-negotiable first step. You just cannot forecast cash flow if you don't know the temporal boundaries. The timeline has to cover every single phase: initiation, planning, design, procurement, the actual construction, right up to commissioning and completion.
And it's not enough to just say, start next January, finish in 2 years. The source really stresses granularity, right? Which is where a lot of these initial forecasts can fail.
Precisely. For a high-value project, having the overall start and finish dates is necessary, but it's not sufficient. For effective tracking, you have to break it down.
How granular.
Monthly, or even better, weekly periods. Because if you only look at it quarterly, you might completely miss a critical 4-week stretch in the summer where, say, 3 major subcontractor invoices all land at once.
And suddenly you're in a massive negative cash position you never saw coming.
Exactly. That granularity isn't just a nice to have, it's your financial protection.
Okay, so once we have the timeline structure, when we move on to step 7.2, break down the work breakdown structure, or WBS. This is where the cost data gets organized.
Yes. The WBS it's a detailed hierarchical breakdown of every single task, every element, every deliverable for the project.
Every little piece.
Every little piece. And every task requires resources, and every one of those resources translates directly into a cost. This is the step that moves you beyond saying the mechanical systems cost X to a much more detailed understanding.
To something like
the HVAC installation for Zone 3 requires Y specific materials, Z hours of specialized labor, and it will be completed during weeks 15 through 18.
So the WBS itemizes the ingredients, the cost centers, down to that granular level. And then the trick is connecting that itemized list to the timeline we just built.
That's it exactly. You itemize the costs, and then you have to align the estimated cash requirements with when the payments for those specific WBS elements will actually occur. It all circles back to that granular schedule. The schedule doesn't just dictate progress, it dictates the timing of the money leaving your account.
That link cost, task, and timeline, that's where the forecast stands or falls.
It is, which leads us right into Phase 2, identifying the financial details, starting with 7.3. Identify key cost categories. These are the specific outflows that will populate your model.
We're talking about the major spending buckets, which can be, highly volatile in a big construction project.
They are, and we have to list them explicitly so nothing gets missed. This includes the direct costs like materials, concrete, steel, timber, all with different payment schedules. Then there's labor, so wages, salaries, benefits.
What about the big ticket items?
Definitely. Equipment renting or buying cranes, excavators, that can be a huge front-loaded expense. And, of course, the big one, subcontractor costs for specialized trades like HVAC, electrical, plumbing.
But the forecast can't just be about the physical build, right? There are other obligations.
Absolutely right. You have to account for permits and licenses, all the fees and approvals, which often have fixed payment dates no matter what's happening on site, and, maybe most critically, overheads.
The indirect costs.
The indirect costs. Insurance, office utilities, admin staff, legal fees. These costs have to be rigorously calculated and allocated to specific project phases so you know when those non-site payments are due. If you ignore them, you're just systemically underestimating your outflow.
So once we know what we're paying for, we have to figure out how and when those costs become actual payments, which is all controlled by step 7.4. Schedule payments based on contract terms.
The contract is everything here. It's not just a legal document, it's the financial playbook for the project.
It turns an estimate into an obligation.
A firm obligation with a date. You have to meticulously review the clauses on progress payments, retention, milestones, all of it. If the contract says you pay within 45 days of an invoice, your forecast needs to build in that 45-day lag for every single major outflow.
Can you break down the structure of these payments? For listeners who might not be deep in construction finance, how do progress payments work? What about mobilization costs?
Certainly. Progress payments are made to the contractor when they complete and get certified for specific milestones or a certain percentage of the work. For example, once the structural steel is 90% erected and certified, a payment is triggered.
Okay.
Then you have mobilization costs. These happen right at the very beginning: site setup, equipment delivery, material deposits. These costs are a huge, unavoidable initial cash drain that happens before any money comes in from the client.
So you're guaranteed to start in a negative cash flow position.
Almost always. Which brings us to a mechanism that really puts long-term pressure on working capital: retainage.
Yes, retainage. How does that get calculated and managed in the forecast?
Retainage is a crucial detail, and it's often mishandled in basic forecasts. It's a portion of the payment, usually about 5 to 10%, that the client withholds.
You just hold it back.
They hold it back until the project is totally finished and the contractor has fulfilled all their obligations, including any warranty periods.
So for every $100,000 of work you do and get certified, you might only get paid $90,000. You're always operating with 10% of your earned cash locked up until the very end.
Exactly. The forecast has to show that retention amount as never being available during the build. And you have to know when it gets released. Sometimes a chunk is released at substantial completion, but the rest, the final payment, might not come for months. Forecasting that final injection of cash accurately is vital.
Okay, now we move into phase 3. We're shifting focus from paying out to getting paid. This brings us to 7.5, estimate cash inflows. Where does the revenue come from?
Generally from those progress payments from the client. The timing is dictated by the contract, but the crucial point here is the payment lag.
Tell us more about that lag. Our costs are driven by the work schedule, when we order materials, when we pay labor, but the billing is often delayed. What creates that friction?
There are a few friction points. First, you complete the milestone. Second, you submit the invoice, that's progress billing. Third, the owner's rep has to certify that the work is actually done correctly. Fourth, the owner's finance department has to process it all.
So
if your contract allows 30 days for payment after certification, and certification takes 15 days, that means work you did in February might not result in cash in your account until mid-April.
that lag is where companies get into trouble.
It's the single fastest way to create an unforeseen cash crisis if you don't model it accurately. The forecast has to include estimated billing dates and amounts, but also account for that delay.
Is there anything in a contract that can help with that initial negative period for mobilization costs?
Sometimes, yes. The source mentions advance payments where a client gives you an upfront sum to fund the initial setup that can dramatically smooth things out. And you also have to forecast the retention release date, that final big cash injection at the very end.
This all sounds so meticulous, but construction is famous for being unpredictable. We're talking about the ideal plan, but the source warns we have to acknowledge real-world friction.
That's the critical warning. An invoice can be disputed over quality or scope changes, and a projected inflow can just vanish for months. This inherent instability leads us straight to step 7.7. Anticipate contingencies and risk factors. This is where it gets really interesting.
Because you're trying to quantify the unknown.
You are.
Yeah.
And how do you do that?
Yeah.
You set aside contingency reserves. The source material suggests a specific industry range, typically 5 to 15% of the total project cost.
And that's not for planned work.
No, this budget is specifically for unexpected but probable events. Think material price spikes, minor scope changes, weather delays.
5 to 15% is a huge range. What determines if a project needs 5% or 15%?
It's all about the risk profile. A standard office fit-out might be 5%, but a new bridge project in an area with seasonal flooding risk, that might demand the full 15%. Professionals use things like Monte Carlo simulations to justify that number, not just pluck it out of the air.
So contingency is for the known unknowns, but the source also mentions risk adjustments on top of that.
Yes. Beyond the general contingency, you identify very specific, measurable risks, not just delays, but a 6-week delay to the specialized mechanical component delivery. You then estimate the specific financial impact of that risk and build it into the forecast, maybe by pushing out certain payment dates and increasing later labor costs.
That detailed risk analysis brings us to phase 4, modeling and execution. This starts with 7.6. Develop a detailed construction schedule. How does the schedule drive the financial output?
This detailed schedule, often built with tools like MS Project or Primavera, outlines the precise sequence and timing of every task. Its financial purpose is to link specific tasks to their associated costs, down to the hour of labor and the yard of concrete.
So, if the schedule says the steel frame is finished in week 20, the forecast for the weeks leading up to that must include the payment for that steel, including the contract's lag time.
Exactly. Without linking schedule to cost, the forecast is just a guess. By linking them, you can accurately predict when cash payments will be incurred. And crucially, if the schedule shifts, the forecast must be adjusted immediately to show the financial impact.
All this data timeline, costs, terms, risks, it all culminates in step 7.8. Create a cash flow model. This is the blueprint.
This is where it all comes together. The model synthesizes all that data into one cohesive structure, usually in Excel or specialized software. This is where you see the financial life cycle of the project.
What are the absolute core components of this model?
You need 1, clearly defined time periods, weekly or monthly. 2, detailed cash outflows, factoring in payment terms. And 3, projected cash inflows, factoring in the lag.
And the most important metric, the early warning signal?
Is the net cash flow for each period. Inflows minus outflows. This net figure is your early warning system. It immediately flags those negative periods, allowing you to plan ahead.
Let's use the simple example from the source material 7.11 to make this crystal clear.
Okay. In January, the planned work is 10%. But because of mobilization and upfront material costs, the projected cash inflow is $100,000, but the outflow is $150,000.
Resulting in a net cash flow of negative $50,000. That's the dip. What's the biggest mistake people make when they hit that dip?
Panicking. They delay paying subcontractors, or they dip into reserves they'll need later. The correct action is preemptive. If the forecast showed this deficit 3 months ago, you would have already arranged for short-term working capital. The negative figure isn't the problem. The surprise of the negative figure is the disaster.
Now let's look at February. Planned work jumps to 20%. Inflow is $200,000, outflow is $180,000. The net cash flow shifts dramatically to positive $20,000.
And that perfectly illustrates the cycle. Heavy initial outflows, followed by a positive cash flow once the big progress payments start landing. The forecast predicts the troughs and the peaks so you can manage liquidity through them.
That's the dynamic nature. But we can't treat this model as a static document, which brings us to 7.9. Review and adjust the forecast regularly.
It's a living document, not a tombstone. The source says you need monthly reviews, minimum. You compare actual cash flows to the projection and adjust. You do continuous cost tracking, comparing actual costs to the budget for every single item.
And what if something major happens, like a big change order from the client that adds 6 weeks to the schedule?
You must immediately engage in reforecasting. It's not optional. You have to reforecast to reflect that change. Ignoring a schedule shift is like ignoring a pending financial disaster that will hit you months down the line.
And for mega projects, this level of detail needs serious computing power. That's step 7.0. Use software tools.
Absolutely. Excel is flexible, but specialized software streamlines things. MS Project is great because it links costs to schedules, so a delay automatically updates the financial timeline. Primavera P6 is even more advanced, used by major developers for its meticulous resource leveling and cash flow reporting.
So to wrap up this whole financial section, what are the best practices in 7.12, the core rules for success?
There are 5 core rules. 1. Align the forecast with milestones, tying payments to actual certifiable progress. 2. Monitor closely, watching for variances. 3. Maintain contingencies, that 5-15% buffer. 4. Communicate with stakeholders about payment schedules. And 5. Use technology to streamline it all.
That is a true masterclass in financial mechanics. We've tackled the technical stack, but no project succeeds on spreadsheets alone. It needs a bedrock of trust. So now we shift to the ethical principles, the non-legal requirements that guide professional behavior.
This shift is crucial because all that meticulous forecasting we just detailed rests entirely on the assumption of honesty, competence, and transparency from everyone. If the contractor misrepresents their progress, if the surveyor is incompetent, or if the client manipulates payment terms, the whole system collapses, no matter how good your software model is.
You touched on a key distinction there, ethics versus law. We're talking about ethics, which isn't always a legal requirement. Why is it still so vital?
Because law is the minimum standard. It's reactive, what you must not do. Ethics is proactive. It's about self-governance, establishing trust and credibility. It protects stakeholders and enhances the credibility of the entire industry. If people don't trust the professionals, the capital dries up.
Let's start with the big picture. 8.1, the general ethical principles. The source outlines 6 of them.
We begin with integrity. This is fundamental honesty, transparency, and fairness. It means actively avoiding deception and fraud. Integrity is the shield that stops the forecast data from being manipulated for short-term gain.
And if that integrity falters, or if mistakes are just made, which happens, the next principle kicks in.
That's accountability. You have to take responsibility for your actions. If there's an error in a cost estimate, accountability means you don't hide it. You acknowledge it immediately and take corrective action to mitigate the fallout.
The third principle is about how we interact with everyone on the project.
That's respect. Treating everyone, from the laborer to the client, with dignity and professionalism. It means promoting fairness, ensuring non-discrimination, and upholding human rights.
The fourth ties directly back to our first section on technical complexity.
Competence. This is about continuously maintaining and improving your knowledge and skills. You must only take on work you're actually qualified for. A surveyor specializing in residential property shouldn't take on a major industrial forecast unless they get the right expertise. It demands continuous learning.
The fifth principle is about all the sensitive financial data these professionals handle.
Yes, confidentiality. In construction, huge amounts of proprietary information are exchanged: financial forecasts, client strategies, subcontractor bids. This principle means protecting that privacy, never disclosing it inappropriately or using it for personal gain.
And finally, a principle that looks beyond the project's profit margin to its legacy.
The sixth one is sustainability. Ethical professionals have to consider the environmental and social impacts of their work. This goes beyond just the legal minimums. It involves actively choosing practices that minimize harm and maximize long-term benefits for the community.
That sets the moral universe. Now let's narrow the focus to a specific, globally recognized standard. We're moving to Section 3, the RACS standard and its 5 rules for professionals.
The Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, or RICS, is incredibly significant. It sets the bar for professionals in land, property, and construction worldwide. Its 5 rules aren't suggestions, they are mandates.
Okay, let's detail these 5 rules using the specific examples to show how they apply in the real world. Rule number 1, Act with integrity.
This is the cornerstone. It requires honesty, fairness, transparency. It means never misleading clients, never accepting bribes, and proactively avoiding any conflicts of interest.
And the specific example really grounds it.
It does. The rule is clear. A surveyor has to disclose any personal or financial interest that could possibly influence their objectivity. If you're asked to recommend a contractor and you own shares in one of the bidders, your client needs to know that. Integrity demands that disclosure.
Rule number 2, always provide a high standard of service.
This is all about competence and quality, tying right back to Section 1. You have to offer services that meet the highest standards, delivered competently, on time, and with the necessary expertise. It means you have to know that forecast model inside and out.
And the example links this directly to the financial tools.
It connects perfectly. A project manager must ensure costs are accurately forecasted, using that rigorous process we covered, and that any advice is based on sound analysis. If you use outdated material prices to win a contract, you are violating this ethical rule, even if you haven't broken a law.
Rule number 3, act in a way that promotes trust in the profession. This is about the reputation of the collective.
Correct. Members have a responsibility to uphold the reputation of RICS and the whole profession. They have to behave in ways that enhance public confidence. This is hard because it forces you to look beyond your own self-interest.
So this is where reporting misconduct comes in. It's easy to say, but there's a lot of practical pressure not to.
That's where the rule gets its teeth. The expectation is that if you see unethical behavior, fraud, gross negligence, you should report it. The pressure comes from fear of retaliation, risk to your career. But silence in the face of misconduct undermines the collective trust. This rule really mandates courage.
Rule number 4, treat others with respect.
This demands absolute fairness and equality toward all parties, clients, colleagues, subcontractors. It actively promotes diversity and inclusion, recognizing that biases can influence everything from contract tendering to rental agreements.
And the example here is from property management.
Precisely. A property manager must ensure equal treatment for all tenants, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status. They have to avoid any form of discrimination in housing or leasing.
And finally, rule number 5, take responsibility.
This is a broad requirement to fulfill all your professional obligations. You own your outputs. And crucially, it explicitly covers the need for continuing professional development, or CPD. It's not enough to be competent on day one. You have to maintain it.
And the example shows why that's an ethical requirement.
Exactly. A construction surveyor has to stay updated on the latest building regulations. If you advise a client using an outdated fire code, that's not just an outdated practice, it's an ethical failure under this rule. You're responsible for the quality of your current knowledge.
Okay, we've covered the financial mechanics and the ethical foundation. Now let's synthesize them in Section 4, the strategic importance of ethics. Why is upholding these rules so critical to the financial health we talked about in Section 1?
The link is direct and profound. Upholding these principles fosters trust. Think back to progress payments and retainage. Clients are handing over huge sums of money based entirely on reports and certifications from these professionals.
So if the client loses trust in the surveyor who certifies a milestone, maybe they suspect a conflict of interest, they won't release the payment.
That is the financial domino effect. Trust ensures clients feel secure. If a professional's integrity is compromised, the flow of capital is instantly compromised. Ethics is the lubrication that keeps the financial engine moving.
And the consequences of failure are severe, covering both legal and reputational risks.
Unethical behavior like fraud or manipulating data in the forecast can lead to legal action, breach of contract claims, huge liabilities. But beyond the courts, it just destroys your reputation. And reputation is the currency you use to get future contracts. Damage that, and your future cash flow is zero.
Conversely, professional integrity fuels long-term success.
Ethical behavior is what sustains professional relationships for decades. It builds stronger networks. Ethical professionals get repeat business because clients know they can expect competence and honesty every single time. It stabilizes your income.
And these individual actions contribute to the industry standards and public perception.
When professionals maintain high ethical standards, they contribute to the positive image of the entire profession. This attracts talent, capital, and regulatory confidence, which benefits everyone.
So for the listener, what are the best practices for upholding ethical standards? How do you integrate these rules into daily life?
The source outlines 4 critical steps. First, regular ethics training. It has to be continuous education on current challenges, new regulations, evolving standards. It's an ongoing conversation.
Second, we need tools for navigating the gray areas.
Right, using ethical decision-making frameworks. Professionals should be trained to use structured tools to analyze complex dilemmas. This ensures that before a stressful decision is made, all potential impacts, financial, social, reputational, are considered.
And third, creating an environment where people can actually raise concerns safely.
That's monitoring and reporting. There have to be clear, safe channels for reporting unethical behavior, where people are protected from retaliation. It requires a culture where ethics is valued above short-term profit.
And finally, the ongoing requirement that underpins Rule 5.
Professional development.
Yeah.
You have to actively pursue CPD. It's not just about learning new technical skills. It's about staying competent and informed on best practices, legal requirements, and evolving ethical standards. Competence itself is an ethical imperative.
Wow. We have successfully dissected the mechanics of project finance and the morality of professional conduct. It seems abundantly clear that true success in contract management balances that technical proficiency.
The rigorous 12-step forecast.
Right, with its contingency reserves and WBS integration, with an unwavering moral conduct grounded in those 5 RICS ethical standards.
The systems are only as good as the people running them. You can have the most sophisticated financial model, but if the underlying data, the completion percentages, the cost estimates, are manipulated because of a lack of integrity, the entire forecast is useless. The project is exposed to risk, and client trust is destroyed instantly.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener? The ultimate takeaway is that financial stability and ethical integrity are not separate goals.
They are mutually dependent.
Exactly. Ethics is not a luxury you bolt on at the end. It's the prerequisite for financial predictability. You cannot sustain one without the other.
Which raises a powerful final question for our listeners to think about. It's a question professionals face every day. Given the need for total transparency and cash flow management, how do you ensure that act with integrity remains your guidepost, especially when project delays threaten your own company's periods of negative net cash flow?
That's the real test, isn't it? It is easy to be ethical when the money is flowing well, when you're in the plus column. The real test of integrity comes when you are staring down that minus sign, knowing that a small, undocumented delay in reporting costs.
Or an overly optimistic projection.
Exactly. Something that could save your immediate financial neck, even while violating those core RICS rules.
And that crucial balance, the technical rigor versus the moral pressure, that is precisely what defines a true successful professional in this very demanding field.
A truly insightful deep dive into the financial and ethical landscape of contract management. Thank you for joining us, and we encourage you to continue your exploration of these complex, interwoven concepts. Until next time, stay well informed. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the weeds of corporate governance and high-stakes decisions.
We are. We're going to be talking about some of the most stressful situations a company can face.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to give you that shortcut to understanding what happens when everything seems to be going wrong on a massive project. We're translating the dense legal clauses and complex org charts into something you can actually use.
And our sources today are really focused on 2 huge and very much related challenges. First, what happens when something completely out of your control hits? Let's say a critical market event, like a sudden crippling shortage of a key supplier.
Right.
And that forces a company to think about the unthinkable, the ultimate strategic retreat. Pulling the plug on a multi-million, maybe even billion-dollar project. Who makes that call?
And then there's the flip side. Let's say you decide to push through, you hold your breath and hope for the best, but a supplier still fails to meet a deadline.
Then what?
Exactly. How do those penalties in the contract actually work? Are they fair compensation for the losses you're taking, or are they just these massive punitive fines designed to scare everyone into compliance?
So today we're analyzing the governance structure needed to make that huge exit decision, and then we're diving into the legal framework that enforces performance if you decide to stay the course.
This is such a critical deep dive because it's not theoretical risk management. This isn't a textbook exercise.
Not at all. This is about the real-world mechanisms that organizations use to, frankly, mitigate financial catastrophe.
Yeah.
It's about managing enormous contractual liabilities, especially in sectors like construction, aerospace, large-scale manufacturing. We're really looking at the architecture of accountability.
Okay, let's set the stage. Let's start with that moment of pure panic. You've committed, let's say, $1 billion to build a new semiconductor fab, or a new piece of critical infrastructure.
The money's been allocated, teams are in place, the ground has been broken.
And then, bam, a geopolitical event shuts down a shipping lane. A new environmental regulation makes your primary component obsolete overnight. Or maybe just overwhelming global demand has completely wiped out the supplier base for one critical piece of machinery.
The phones start ringing off the hook.
Exactly. And the project steering committee has to gather and seriously consider something that was, just a line item in a risk register a month ago, a full strategic exit.
So when we talk about an exit strategy here, it's important to frame it correctly. The sources are really clear on this.
It's not just admitting failure.
No, not at all. It's a proactive and ideally a pre-planned route for dealing with a project-threatening risk. And that risk could be the supplier issue we just mentioned, or it could be sudden financial constraints, or even that you realize your internal teams just don't have the resources to finish the job.
And the decision-making process for this is, as you can imagine, incredibly nuanced. It's not one person making a gut call.
Heavens, no. It depends so much on the company's structure, the contracts you already have in place, and of course the volatility of that specific market you're in.
This is really where governance proves its worth. Because while the final ultimate authorization might land on one person's desk, that decision is really the end product of a whole system of inputs from different groups.
And that structure is specifically designed to do one thing: mitigate individual bias. It's there to ensure that an exit is a strategic necessity, not just a panicked reaction from one person.
Okay, let's break down that structure. Let's start at the very top of the food chain, the group that has to answer to the shareholders and the press. Executive management.
We're talking about the CEO, the CFO, the COO, the C-suite. They hold the ultimate authority, the final veto.
So why does that final heavy decision have to sit so high up? Why can't a divisional head make that call?
Because the decision to exit a major project isn't just an operational choice. You can be an existential one for the company. They are the only ones who oversee the organization's holistic health.
They see the whole picture.
The whole picture. The long-term strategic positioning, the financial stability, the impact on the stock price. An exit, especially one driven by these big market forces, it fundamentally changes the company's strategic direction.
You could be ceding market share to a competitor.
You're definitely reallocating massive amounts of capital and people. It's a huge strategy shift. And they're the only ones with the comprehensive view required to authorize something of that magnitude. Their necks are on the line, so to speak.
Right, ultimate accountability. But they're not operating in a vacuum. They are heavily, heavily influenced by the person whose job it is to champion the project in the first place, the project sponsor.
That's right. This is usually a very senior person, a director, or an executive vice president. They are the project's champion, its biggest cheerleader inside the organization.
But they're also its primary strategic gatekeeper.
That's the key. They are accountable for one thing above all else: making sure the project delivers the expected value that was promised in the business case, the value that aligns with the bigger corporate strategy.
So when things go wrong, their role flips.
It has to. If this supplier shortage means the project can no longer deliver that value, maybe the timeline is now 5 years too long or the cost has doubled, the sponsor has to become the internal advocate for termination. They're the one who has to translate the technical failures that the project manager is reporting.
We can't get the widgets.
We can't get the widgets. They translate that into the strategic implications for the C-suite. Because we can't get the widgets, we will miss the market window, and our competitor will beat us.
Okay, but if the sponsor is the champion, isn't there a huge risk of bias? I mean, this person has staked their professional reputation, maybe their entire annual budget, on this project's success.
Oh, absolutely.
How does the governance structure stop that sponsor from just pushing against a necessary exit to protect their own investment, their own reputation?
That is precisely why the system has checks and balances. The sponsor's recommendation, which is naturally going to be biased towards continuing, is counterbalanced by other formal groups.
And the main one is the project steering committee.
Exactly. The steering committee provides that necessary, dispassionate, independent oversight. This committee is usually made up of key stakeholders from across the business.
So not just people from the project's own division.
No, you'll have someone from finance, someone from legal, maybe a senior leader from a completely different business unit. Often, you'll even have external consultants or industry experts on it. They serve as the strategic review panel.
So they're like the strategic jury for the project.
That's a perfect way to put it. They're the jury. They review all the aggregated data, They challenge the underlying assumptions in the reports, and they validate the strategic rationale that's being presented by the sponsor and the project manager.
And they don't have the same emotional attachment.
They shouldn't. Their role is guidance and oversight. They don't execute the project day to day. But their recommendations carry immense weight because they ensure the decision is strategically sound and not just a reflection of, the sponsor's fear of failure.
Okay, so let's get back to the root of our problem in this scenario, the supplier shortage. That suddenly makes the procurement and supply chain teams arguably the most important people in the room.
Their role shifts dramatically. They go from being operational managers, processing purchase orders, to being critical frontline risk analysts.
They have the ground truth.
They have all of it. Their input is absolutely indispensable because they provide the objective market assessment. They're the ones who can answer the critical questions.
It's is this a short-term problem or a long-term one?
Exactly. Is this a regional bottleneck that'll clear up in 3 months? Is it a permanent regulatory shift that just made our old suppliers obsolete? Or has the market for this component simply been exhausted by a new competitor? They have to assess every alternative sourcing strategy, analyze the global market, and most critically, evaluate the real cost and the feasibility of pivoting to new suppliers who might be unvetted or less reliable.
So the C-suite literally cannot make this exit decision until procurement comes back with a definitive report that says either A, we found a workaround, or B, we have exhausted all viable options and this market risk is structural, not temporary.
They are the ultimate reality check. Their recommendation, which has to be based on hard data about market availability and reliability, directly informs that final decision. If procurement says, hey, we found a new supplier in a different country, it'll cost more, but it's viable, the project probably continues.
But if they come back and say the entire global supply chain for this is broken for the next 5 years,
then the decision to exit moves forward with a lot more certainty.
and as soon as anyone even whispers the word exit, you have to get another team involved immediately. The people who have to clean up the mess, the legal and compliance teams.
You've got to bring them in early. I like to think of them as building the liability moat around the organization. They are the essential risk mitigators.
Because exiting a project of this scale isn't like canceling a gym membership.
Not even close. It involves terminating incredibly complex multi-party contracts. The legal team has to go through every single one with a fine-tooth comb. They're looking at termination clauses, notice periods, penalties for early termination, who owns the intellectual property that's been developed so far, what are our obligations to subcontractors we're now leaving high and dry.
It sounds like a minefield.
It is. Their guidance is what ensures the whole exit process is executed in a way that minimizes legal exposure, avoids years of costly litigation, and adheres to all the compliance rules for severing those ties. The exit has to be, above all, legally defensible.
Okay, so that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the project manager. In terms of formal authority to say yay or nay on the exit, they're pretty low on the list.
Very low. They don't have a veto.
But their data, the information they provide, is the lifeblood of this entire process.
Absolutely. The project manager is the data provider. They are the reporter from the front lines. They're the ones compiling the detailed, factual reports on progress against the plan, the performance variance, the financial burn rate, and the new projected time to completion, assuming this supplier shortage continues.
And their objectivity is everything.
It's where the whole governance structure gets tested. Because if a project manager who is maybe fearing the political consequences of reporting bad news starts to sugarcoat the risks or inflate the feasibility reports to make things look better than they are,
The entire decision-making process is flawed from the start.
completely flawed. A healthy governance structure has to protect the project manager's ability to report the objective, unvarnished truth, even when that truth is, this project is failing.
That's a really fascinating dynamic when you think about it. The whole structure is designed to mitigate the very human element of fear and bias across all of those distinct roles.
That's a perfect summary of it. Okay, so now we know who is in the room making the decision. Let's dig into the why. What's the complex calculus they're using? Because senior leadership doesn't just exit because a project is a bit late or over budget.
No, it has to be something more fundamental.
It is. They're weighing 5 critical areas, constantly comparing the pain of exiting today versus the potential, unmitigated disaster of continuing on.
Let's start with the first and most obvious one, risk assessment. This moves from being a background activity to the central gonna-go analysis.
Right. At this stage, it's not just about listing risks anymore. It requires a deep, quantitative, and qualitative dive into one question. Does the risk of continuing now outweigh any potential reward?
And they have to look beyond just the supplier shortage itself.
Oh, much beyond. They have to assess the cascade effect. So what is the risk of quality degradation if we're forced to use these new, less vetted alternative suppliers? What is the risk to our brand's reputation if the project is finally delivered, but it's 3 years late and massively over budget?
Do customers lose faith in you?
Do they lose faith? Do you get hit with contractual penalties from your own customers? This assessment has to be brutally honest, identifying very specific threats. The goal here is pure damage prevention.
And the second factor is always the biggest elephant in the room, the financial impact. This is where the conversation gets really, really difficult, especially because of the immense weight of sunk costs.
Sunk costs.
Yeah.
The great enemy of rational decision-making. Sunk costs are all the money you've already spent that you can never get back.
The materials you've bought, the engineering fees you've paid, the hole you've dug in the ground.
Exactly. And psychologically, managers absolutely hate walking away from money that's already been invested. It feels like admitting a mistake. It feels like waste.
It's the I've already come this far, I can't turn back now mentality.
Which is a well-known cognitive bias called the sunk cost fallacy. But the crucial insight, and what a good CFO will force the team to recognize, is that rational decision-making requires you to ignore sunk costs entirely.
You have to pretend that money is gone, because it is.
It is gone. You only look forward. The only calculation that matters is comparing the cost of cancellation, terminating contracts, maybe paying some small penalties, against the new projected cost of completion, given all the delays and risks we now know about.
So you have to actively fight that emotional trap that makes us want to keep throwing good money after bad just because we're already invested.
Precisely. The CFO's analysis has to be stark and forward-looking. They'll calculate the new financial viability. If we continue, what is our new internal rate of return, considering these inevitable delays and cost overruns? If that projected future value has dropped below a critical threshold, or worse, if the projected future losses are now greater than the immediate cancellation costs,
then the only rational choice is to cut your losses and exit immediately.
it's the only way to stop the financial hemorrhage. And a good analysis will also include opportunity cost. What better, more strategically aligned project could we launch with the capital and people we would free up by canceling this one right now?
That's a huge point. Okay, so shifting from the internal finances to the external world, the third factor is that deep analysis of market conditions. In our scenario, the supplier shortage is the trigger.
Right. So leadership has to figure out if this shortage is just a ripple on the pond or if it's a full-blown tidal wave.
Is it temporary and cyclical, or is it a permanent structural shift in the market?
That's the million-dollar question. They have to analyze the root cause. Was it a single factory fire that will be rectified in 6 months? Or is it a new global trade policy, a permanent change in environmental regulations that just wiped out the old technology? Or maybe the sustained entry of a massive new competitor who is just consuming all the available resources.
And the strategy that follows from that analysis is completely different.
Completely. If the analysis points to a temporary shock, the strategy might be to just delay the project, or to renegotiate the terms, or maybe pay a huge premium for a small volume of supplies while you wait for the market to normalize.
But if it's a long-term structural problem,
then the conclusion often forces an exit. Because continuing to pursue a goal that is now unachievable is the definition of strategic folly. You're just wasting resources, time, and focus, and you're preventing the organization from pivoting to areas where the supply chain is more resilient. It might even be the catalyst that pushes the company to say, you know what, we need to develop this capability internally over the long run.
that brings us to factor 4, which is that high-level check on strategic alignment. This zooms out from the project itself and asks if the company is even pointing the ship in the right direction anymore.
Right. Every project exists for one reason: to serve a corporate objective. If the project's core parameters, its cost, its timeline, its output, are so severely compromised by these new issues that it no longer meets its original strategic mandate, then continuing just creates organizational misalignment.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Let's say the whole point of the project was to be the first to market with a groundbreaking new product. That was its strategic mission. But now this supplier shortage means you'll be 3 years late.
By which time your 3 biggest competitors will have already launched their own versions.
Exactly. The project has now failed its core strategic mission, regardless of whether you can eventually, someday, complete it. An exit in that case prevents the organization from spending years and billions of dollars fundamentally misaligned with its own strategy.
And finally, we have the fifth factor, which is often the most subjective but can be just as important: stakeholder impact.
This is where management has to do a deep analysis of the reputational cost. How will investors react to a messy, chaotic termination versus a disciplined, transparent, strategic exit?
How will your key customers react?
Critically, how will your other partners and suppliers view your organization's reliability and commitment going forward? Trust is the currency here. An organization has to weigh all those relational and reputational impacts.
And the calculation is that a planned, legally sound exit, even if it's painful, is often much better than a chaotic, years-long public failure to deliver.
Because that's what truly erodes market confidence in your ability to execute anything.
So, the logic is sound. It's driven by these 5 critical areas, but good governance demands a clear process, a roadmap. Our sources detail the 7 steps to formalizing an exit strategy. This is the structure that makes the decision methodical and, crucially, defensible.
Right. This sequence provides the paper trail and the necessary checks and balances. Step 1, as we've already touched on, is to conduct a thorough risk assessment. This isn't just a meeting. It produces a formalized risk matrix that clearly identifies the likelihood of failure and the potential financial and operational severity of things like quality issues or further delays if the project continues.
Step 2 is what I'd call the mandatory sanity check. Evaluate alternative options.
A senior leader should never be presented with only one option: kill the project. This step forces the project teams to demonstrate that they have exhausted all other possibilities.
Like renegotiating the scope with the client.
Exactly. Or reducing the project's reliance on those scarce components, finding expensive but temporary bridging solutions, or doing a full assessment on the viability of bringing the work in-house. If you haven't done that homework, your decision to exit just looks reckless.
Okay, what's step 3?
Step 3 is the rigorous financial analysis. This is where the CFO really steps into the spotlight. We need a full cost-benefit analysis comparing the net present value of continuing versus the total cost of cancellation.
And this analysis has to explicitly deal with the sunk costs versus future spending.
Yes, it has to clearly separate sunk costs from future unavoidable expenditures, and it has to project the liability associated with any contract termination penalties.
Then step 4, the legal team's big moment, is the mandatory legal review.
The legal team has to scrutinize every single relevant contract. They need to identify the precise termination clauses, review potential liabilities to all the subcontractors, determine the required notice periods, and ensure that the proposed exit strategy complies with all regulatory and jurisdictional requirements. This step is all about minimizing the legal wake of the organization's retreat.
Step 5 is about ensuring transparency, stakeholder consultation.
And this means active engagement, not just sending out a memo after the fact. It means gathering input from key internal teams, from your clients, from your crucial partners. This helps management gauge the severity of the relational impact and allows them to preventively manage the reputational fallout.
You need to be able to tell people why the decision was made, not just what the decision was.
Precisely.
Step 6 feels like the checkmate moment. The steering committee and Nodora board review.
This is it. All the accumulated data, the risk matrix, the financial models, the legal summary, the stakeholder feedback, it's all presented here. The committee's job is to challenge the assumptions and the recommendations, provide that final layer of strategic guidance, and ultimately vote on the recommendation to proceed with the exit. It ensures that multiple senior perspectives have validated the data.
And that leads to step 7, the culmination of everything, the final decision.
This is the formal authorization. It's made by the executive management or the full board of directors based on that mountain of aggregated data and the strategic validation from the preceding 6 steps. It is now a decision that is defensible legally, financially, and strategically.
Okay, let's pivot for a second. That whole process is about crisis response. But what about proactive defense? If we know these supplier shortages are a constant threat in today's world, what are the most effective ways an organization can protect itself from the very start?
This is the insurance policy. And the first and most foundational is simply to diversify your suppliers. It sounds obvious, but so many companies fail to do it properly.
And this means more than just not relying on a single company, right? It's about diversifying geographically, too.
Absolutely. It means reducing your dependence on a single geopolitical region or even a single manufacturing technology. True resilience requires having vetted secondary and even tertiary options in different parts of the world who are capable of scaling up production quickly if your primary source goes down. It costs more upfront to maintain those relationships and audits, but it pays for itself tenfold in a crisis.
Okay, what's the second proactive measure?
Strong contractual protections. This requires real foresight in the legal drafting phase long before any problems arise.
And what should you be looking for specifically in the contract beyond just the standard terms?
You need to look for substitution clauses. Your contracts must clearly outline your right as the owner to substitute or replace a supplier who fails to perform. And it has to be clear about who absorbs the increased costs associated with that substitution. This builds operational flexibility directly into the legal framework of your project.
Third, and this moves from legal theory to practical planning, is to build contingency plans.
This is about moving from a general idea of we should have a backup to specific, documented, executable steps. You need to map out the crisis response before the crisis ever hits.
So you need defined trigger points.
Yes. If supplier A hits a 30-day delay, we immediately activate Plan B. And Plan B isn't a vague idea. It's a document that says we will start stockpiling materials Y and Z, or we'll shift our manufacturing needs in-house for the next 6 months. It's about having a ready-to-go alternative sourcing strategy, not scrambling to find new options when you're already on fire.
And the final proactive step?
Regular supplier audits. This is about constant surveillance of your critical suppliers.
So you're not just taking their word for it that everything's fine.
You can't. You need to proactively assess their operational and financial health. You need visibility into their supply chain, their secondary suppliers, their financial stability, their own contingency plans. This kind of preventative measure turns your potential blind spots into actionable risk intelligence. It allows you to react long before a situation gets so bad that you're having to dust off that 7-step exit strategy.
Okay, that covers the massive strategic decision to exit. But let's rewind and take the other path. Let's assume the organization does its due diligence, they decide the market risk is manageable or temporary, and they decide to stick with the project.
They're rolling the dice.
They are. And inevitably, a key supplier or contractor causes a major non-excusable delay. This shifts our entire focus from high-level governance to brass tacks contractual accountability.
Right. We move from the boardroom to a specific clause in the contract. And penalties for delayed contractors are the vital safeguard in these large-scale projects. They are there to compensate the owner for the very real financial impact of those missed deadlines.
They're not just there to be punitive.
Not at all. They are applied through pre-agreed mechanisms to ensure that the project owner isn't left holding the bag and absorbing all the costs of the contractor's failure.
And the centerpiece of this entire enforcement mechanism, especially in big construction contracts, is something called liquidated damages, or LDs. Let's do a real deep dive into what LDs are and, maybe most importantly, how they have to be calculated to be legally enforceable.
Okay. So liquidated damages are a specific sum of money stipulated right up front in the contract that the contractor agrees to pay for each unit of time, usually a day, sometimes a week, that the project is delayed beyond the official contracted completion date.
And their purpose is very specific.
Crystal clear. They are meant to be compensatory, not punitive. They represent the owner's pre-calculated, quantifiable financial loss that results directly from that delay.
Okay, quantifiable loss is the key phrase there. When a contract is being drafted, what specific financial components are factored into that LD rate calculation? This seems like where the real technical work happens.
This is the legal high-wire act, because it has to be a genuine pre-estimate of loss. It's a complex calculation, but it generally includes several measurable components.
Yeah.
First, there are the daily overhead costs for the owner.
What does that include?
Things like the cost of your site supervision team, extra security, insurance premiums, your own project management salaries, all the costs that now have to continue for longer than planned.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, and this is often the biggest piece, is the lost revenue or opportunity cost. If you're building a factory that was supposed to open on July 1st and start generating $50,000 a day in revenue, every day of delay is $50,000 of lost income. The LDs have to reflect that.
Right. And there are other costs, too.
There are. Third, you have financing costs. You're continuing to carry these huge construction loans or capital for a facility that isn't operational and isn't generating any return. And finally, you might have penalty fees that the owner now has to pay to their downstream clients because of this delay.
So the LD rate has to be this verifiable, reasonable aggregation of all those expected losses. It's a formula.
It has to be. So if a contractor is delayed by 30 days and your carefully calculated LD rate is $10,000 per day, the total compensation owed is $300,000. It's simple math at that point.
But, and this is the crucial part, if the owner just plucks a number out of thin air and sets the LD rate at, say, $100,000 a day for a project where their verifiable losses are only $10,000,
then that amount becomes excessive. It stops being compensation, and it crosses a very important legal line into being a penalty or a punishment. And that brings us to the core legal hurdle of enforceability.
before we get to that legal fight, let's just briefly touch on the other financial levers that are used to enforce performance, starting with performance bonds.
A performance bond is basically a three-party guarantee. The contractor goes to a surety company or a bank and buys this bond, which essentially promises you, the owner, that the project will be completed according to the contract.
So it's like an insurance policy for the owner.
It is. If the contractor defaults, they go bankrupt or just walk off the job, the owner can make a claim against that bond. It acts as an independent, guaranteed pool of funds that you can use to cover your delay costs, or even the costs of hiring a brand new contractor to come in and finish the job.
Then there's a simpler mechanism, retention money.
This is a very direct financial incentive. With every payment you make to the contractor, you withhold a defined percentage, say 5 or 10%, and you hold it in an account until the very end of the project.
Until they've completed everything and fixed any defects.
Right. So if deadlines are being severely missed, you, the owner, have immediate leverage. You can threaten to withhold that final large retention payment to cover your delay costs, or to compel the contractor to expedite their work to get paid.
And finally, there's the concept of acceleration costs.
These kick in when a contractor is already delayed, but you, the owner, absolutely must have the project finished by the original date. You can direct the contractor to accelerate.
Meaning work overtime, hire more people.
Exactly. Bring in more equipment, use more expensive, faster construction methods. If the original delay was the contractor's fault, the costs associated with that acceleration are often structured as a penalty that falls directly on them. It forces them to spend the money to get back on schedule.
Okay, so we have all these tools. Now let's get to the crucial legal question that determines if you can even use them. When are LDs actually applied? It all hinges on this distinction between excusable versus non-excusable delays.
This is where delay analysis experts, these highly specialized consultants, make their money. Non-excusable delays are, thankfully, pretty straightforward.
These are the contractor's fault.
100%. They're caused by the contractor's own failures, using substandard materials, inefficient planning, a lack of supervision, or just not putting enough workers on the job. If the delay falls into this category, the LDs are applied. The contractor is fully at fault and has to pay.
But the contractor isn't always at fault. They have a way out if the delay was caused by something else. This is the excusable delay.
Exactly. These are delays that are proven to be outside the contractor's reasonable control. This includes the classic force majeure events.
So, acts of God, natural disasters.
Right. Widespread labor strikes, war, or specific governmental actions like a mandatory shutdown for a pandemic, or an unexpected long delay in a permitting process that's controlled by a third party. If the contractor can prove the delay was excusable, they are granted an extension of time, or an EOT.
And the EOT is equal to the length of that delay.
It should be. And if they get the EOT, no liquidated damages can be applied for that period. The key thing here is that excusable delays usually grant the contractor more time, but not necessarily more money for their own delay costs. They simply avoid the penalty.
Okay, but then we get into the real gray zone, the area that I imagine generates the most legal disputes, concurrent delays. This is when both the owner and the contractor are causing delays at the same time.
This is where things get truly messy and very, very expensive to resolve. Imagine the contractor is delayed by 4 weeks because of their own poor scheduling. But during that exact same 4-week period, you, the owner, delay the project by 5 weeks because you failed to deliver the critical design approvals on time.
So both parties are at fault simultaneously.
Yes, and both delays are affecting the project's critical path and the overall completion date. Courts and arbitrators then have to untangle who is responsible for what. It's incredibly complex.
So what are the common legal approaches to sorting that out?
Well, it varies by jurisdiction. Some places use what's called the dominant cause test, where they try to figure out which party's delay was the true primary cause of the overall project delay. But a more common approach, especially under English law, is something called the prevention principle.
And what does that principle say?
It holds that an owner cannot claim liquidated damages for a period of delay during which they themselves were preventing the contractor from completing the work on time. You can't benefit from your own breach of contract.
So in that classic concurrent delay scenario, what happens to the LDs?
Under a strict prevention principle approach, the LDs are often waived entirely for the period of concurrency. The contractor gets the necessary extension of time, even though they were also partly at fault. It's a tough pill for owners to swallow, but it prevents them from profiting from their own mistakes.
It sounds like to make any of this work, the burden of documentation on both sides must be absolutely immense.
It's the single most important thing. The sources stress this over and over. Contractors must provide mandatory, formal communication and notice. If a contractor even anticipates a delay, they have to notify the owner immediately and formally apply for that extension of time.
And they can't just send an email saying we're delayed.
No. It has to be a formal application, complete with documented evidence proving the cause and the scope of that excusable event. And here's the kicker. Failure to give timely notice, even for a genuine force majeure event, can result in the contractor losing their right to an EOT.
So the LDs get applied anyway just because they missed a paperwork deadline.
Exactly. It's that strict.
That sets the stage perfectly for the ultimate legal distinction, the one that determines whether any of this is enforceable at all. The legal enforcement and the penalties rule.
This is like the constitutional law of contract penalties. For centuries, courts, especially under English common law, have held that contract clauses cannot be purely punitive. They must adhere to this principle of fairness and reasonableness.
Yeah.
The entire purpose of the clause has to be to indemnify the injured party, to compensate them for their loss, not to enrich them or punish the other side.
So just using the word penalty in the contract is a bad idea. It's like a poison pill for the clause itself.
It's a huge red flag. And the UK Supreme Court really reinforced this in a landmark 2015 case, Cavendish Square Holding versus Talal Al-Makdisi. It was a huge decision.
And what did that case clarify?
It confirmed that the legal test isn't just whether the sum is a genuine pre-estimate of loss anymore. The new, broader test is whether the penalty is out of all proportion to the legitimate interest of the innocent party.
So it's not just about the math, it's about the intent.
It's about the intent. If the court decides that the primary purpose of your clause is to coerce the contractor into performance through financial terror, rather than to genuinely compensate you for your actual foreseeable losses, the clause will be struck down as an unenforceable penalty.
So let's just state it as clearly as possible. The legal difference is existential. Penalties are punitive, legally disfavored, and often unenforceable if they're excessive.
And liquidated damages are enforceable compensation for specific, verifiable, pre-calculated losses. Getting that language, and more importantly, that calculation wrong, can put billions of dollars in potential claims at risk.
And this isn't just an English law quirk. This is a global standard, right?
It's a globally recognized standard.
Yep.
We see the application of LDs everywhere, especially in international construction contracts. There are a FADX suite of contracts, the Red Book for construction, the Yellow Book for design build. They are used all over the world, and they explicitly define and often cap the use of liquidated damages to provide international consistency.
But even those international contracts have to respect local laws, especially in jurisdictions that have strong public sector contracting rules.
That's a critical point. An international contract still has to bow to the sovereign law of the country where the work is being done. Take a country like Saudi Arabia, KSA, for example. While LDs are commonly used, their local government procurement laws often impose maximum caps.
So there's a ceiling on what you can claim regardless of your actual losses.
Exactly. The law might restrict total liquidated damages to a set percentage of the contract value, sometimes as low as 10 or 20%. So this creates a regulatory framework where you can enforce your LDs pretty easily up to that cap, but your maximum liability is constrained by law. International companies operating there must be acutely aware of those local maximums when they're drafting their contracts.
So to wrap up this whole section on accountability, what are the absolute best practices for application and dispute resolution, the things you have to do to make sure these mechanisms actually work when a project goes sideways?
Okay, 4 key things. It all begins with clear contract terms. The contract has to define the LD rate, the calculation methodology, the exemption conditions for EOTs, and any maximum liability cap in completely unambiguous language. If the terms are ambiguous, you've already lost the legal high ground.
Second, And we've hit this hard already. Monitoring and reporting.
Owners need hyper-detailed, continuous progress monitoring. Documentation is everything. You need crystal clear records of the baseline schedule, the progress you've actually achieved, and all the documented correspondence about every single delay. This verifiable data is the only basis you have for applying penalties or for defending against a contractor's claims for extensions.
Third, and this applies to both parties, is those communication and notice provisions.
This is the requirement that both sides must adhere to strict, contractually defined timelines for notification. If a contractor wants an EOT, they have to apply quickly and with full documentation. If the owner intends to impose LDs, they must provide formal notice according to the contract. Failure to follow these communication procedures can invalidate an otherwise perfectly valid claim on either side.
And finally, the essential safeguard for actually preserving the business relationship and finishing the project. Dispute resolution mechanisms.
Yes. Your contract must stipulate the mechanisms for resolving these conflicts before they end up in court, whether that's mandatory mediation, adjudication by an independent expert, or formal arbitration. These structured processes are designed to ensure the fair application of penalties, avoid the extreme costs and delays of litigation, and protect the project's momentum from being completely stalled by a protracted legal fight. #outro.
That was an absolutely exhaustive tour through the governance and the financial architecture of what happens when high-stakes projects fail. We've covered a lot of ground today that goes way beyond the simple definitions.
I think we established two really fundamental pillars. First, that the high-stakes project exit decision is a multi-layered governance exercise. It is not a singular executive panic button.
Right.
It requires executive management to integrate all of those strategic, financial, and legal inputs from those key support structures to achieve a robust, and that word again, defensible strategic retreat.
And second, we really clarified the legal and financial reality of contract penalties. Liquidated damages, and we can't say this enough, are designed exclusively as a tool for compensation.
They require that rigorous calculation as a genuine pre-agreed estimate of actual loss. Any attempt to use them punitively will very likely fail the legal test of reasonableness, and that could cause the owner's entire framework of contractual protection to just collapse.
So understanding this whole structure allows you, the listener, to see how the most successful organizations create resilience. Resilience against both those external market shocks like supplier shortages and internal underperformance.
And at the end of the day, knowledge of these rules, from the high-level governance down to the legal fine print, it truly is the organization's best and sometimes only defense.
Okay, so let's leave you with a final provocative thought that builds on that really critical legal distinction we just talked about. We spent a lot of time detailing how difficult it is to calculate a genuine pre-estimate of loss.
Especially for unique, first-of-their-kind projects, where there's no historical data to base your calculations on.
Exactly. So if your project is truly unprecedented, doesn't that mean the risk that any high LD rate will be successfully challenged in court is exponentially higher?
It's much higher. The owner might believe they're protected by a, say, $50,000 per day clause, but if a court later looks at it and deems it to be punitive because the pre-estimate was so speculative,
they could lose the entire claim, not just have it reduced, but lose it completely.
that's the risk. The whole clause gets struck down as an unenforceable penalty.
So here's the thought. If that entire LD framework collapses because the clause fails the test of reasonableness, the owner is then forced into the incredibly expensive and unpredictable process of having to prove their actual damages in open court after the fact.
A process that could take years and millions in legal fees.
Exactly. So what happens to the project's financing costs? And who absorbs those massive legal fees if the very mechanism that was designed to protect the owner, that LD clause, is ultimately deemed unenforceable? It's something to think about as you scrutinize the compensation language in your next multi-billion-dollar agreement.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.
Have you ever had that feeling deep in a complex project where you're basically just playing whack-a-mole with expectations?
Oh, absolutely.
You know, one person needs a daily check-in, another one wants a super detailed technical spreadsheet.
And then there's always that third person who hasn't replied to an email in 3 weeks.
But has the power to veto the entire budget.
Right.
And you're just drowning in these information requests and all these opinions, and you suddenly realize, I'm spending 80% of my time just managing noise.
And only 20% actually doing the work. It's the classic chaos of information overload.
Exactly.
And that feeling, that sense of being overwhelmed by what you could almost call communication debt, it's universal. It doesn't matter if you're in project management or contract management.
It's always about the people.
It is always about the people, not just the tasks. And if you treat that, high-powered executive who just needs a bit of assurance the same way you treat a developer who needs daily technical specs,
You're just creating inefficiency.
you're guaranteeing failure, frankly.
Absolutely. And today, we are offering a specific, really actionable strategy to get out of that communication chaos. We are diving into a tool that is, I think, deceptively simple in how it looks, but it's just incredibly powerful in how you apply it. We're talking about the stakeholder matrix.
And this matrix is just so central to efficiency, especially in the, let's say, the more formalized world of contract management. It's not just a list of names.
Right.
It's a dynamic method for identifying, for categorizing, and this is the crucial part, for strategizing your interaction with every single person involved. It almost gives you permission to ignore.
Or at least minimally manage.
Exactly. Minimally manage the people who don't need, or frankly don't deserve, your very limited attention.
So our goal in this deep dive is to unpack the two main ways this matrix is used. We're leveraging some fantastic sources we have that detail the very important points in contract management.
And we'll be looking at both lenses.
Yeah, first, the famous one, the really intuitive influence interest grid, and then we'll examine the more static, more standardized categorical grouping method.
And by the end of this, you won't just know who your stakeholders are.
No, you'll know the mandated communication strategy for every single one of them.
We're really focusing exclusively on the structure, the definitions, and the practical, actionable strategies for applying this, turning all that theory into a real working map for success.
Okay, so let's unpack this foundational concept. We all hear the term stakeholder thrown around, but how does the matrix actually refine that? What's the core structure we're looking at here?
At its heart, the stakeholder matrix is a classification tool. It's critical. The sources we have define it very clearly. It's used to identify and categorize every person, every group that has a vested interest.
And it does that based on two criteria.
Just two, but they're the primary ones. First is their influence, or you could just say their power over the project.
Okay, their power.
And the second is their interest in its outcomes. And the whole point, the fundamental purpose, is to achieve effective, targeted engagement that's tailored precisely to that classification.
And the way this is presented, which is what I think makes it so powerful, is the visual. The power interest grid.
Yes.
It's the blueprint, right? It turns these abstract roles into very concrete management instructions. We're just talking about a simple 2x2 box. But where you land in those four quadrants, that's everything.
That visualization is key. I mean, it forces a decision about two variables that are, they're on a spectrum, but you have to place them.
It's like a map.
It is exactly like a map. You're dealing with two axes that define the entire project universe. So you have the y-axis, the vertical one. It represents the level of influence or power.
Ranging from low at the bottom to high at the top.
Right.
So if someone sits high on that y-axis, they've got the formal authority. They can approve big scope changes. They can sign off on funding.
Or, and this is the critical part, they can veto the entire project halfway through. They hold all the strategic leverage.
Okay, so that's power. Then what's the other axis?
So running perpendicular to that, you have the x-axis, the horizontal one. And this represents the level of interest.
So that goes from low on the left to high on the right.
Exactly. And this measures how invested they are in the day-to-day details, the process, the minute-by-minute updates, how much they really care about the success of this specific project.
And that distinction is just so important. Power is the ability to change things.
Right.
But interest is the desire to track or engage with those changes.
Precisely.
So why the visualization matters then is that the second you plot these two variables for every single person you deal with, they land in one of four boxes.
And that location immediately dictates your required management protocol. There's no ambiguity.
And to make sure this isn't all just theory for you, our listener, we're going to anchor this whole discussion to the case study that's in our sources.
It's a great example.
It is. It's the development and rollout of a hypothetical customer ordering system.
And this helps us place those real-world roles, like the developer, the executive, the regulator, the end user, directly into the quadrants.
It turns the abstract structure into something you can actually use, a practical map. Okay, it's a brilliant way to frame it. So now we can get to the core of this deep dive, the four quadrants. These aren't just labels. They are 4 mandatory, distinct communication strategies.
And they define how a project manager allocates their most precious resource,
which is time and attention. So let's start at the top right. This is where both power and interest are at their peak. Quadrant 1.
Quadrant 1, yes. The zone of high influence and high interest.
We call these the key stakeholders. They've got the highest formal power to guide or even derail the project.
And at the same time, they're highly, highly invested in its success, often scrutinizing the process down to the finest detail.
So they hold the ultimate authority and the daily enthusiasm.
The required action here is, well, it's the most resource-intensive of the entire matrix. The mandate is manage closely.
Manage closely. That sounds like a tremendous commitment of resources. What does that really mean in terms of strategic engagement? Is it just sending a lot of emails?
Oh, far from it. It's a strategy built on proactive engagement, total transparency, and granular, regular communication.
So this is the group that needs the most time.
The most time, the most detailed documentation, and the most consistent presence from the project manager and the core team. You have to operate under the assumption that they will, and frankly should, scrutinize every detail.
Because they hold the ultimate accountability for the outcomes.
They do.
It feels intense because any misalignment in this quadrant would be catastrophic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if the person who controls the budget high influence has a different idea of the outcome than the person defining the product high interest, the whole thing is just doomed.
It's doomed before you even start implementation. Misalignment in Q1 leads to scope turn, budget freezes, internal warfare. You name it. What you're really managing here is the alignment between the strategic vision and the tactical reality.
So let's zoom in on our customer ordering system case study. Who are these central figures that demand such close management? Why are they all grouped together?
The visualization in our source material explicitly places 4 key roles here. You have the executive, the PM or project manager, the BA, business analyst, and the SME, the subject matter expert.
Okay, let's just quickly define those acronyms for everyone because the power dynamics are crucial. So the PM is the project manager. They're on the hook for delivery, schedule, budget.
Right. And the executive holds the strategic vision and ultimately the veto power. But the SME and the BA are just as interesting.
The SME, subject matter expert.
The SME is the keeper of the functional knowledge. They define the how and the what of the system's requirements based on their deep domain expertise. Their influence comes from their indispensable technical authority.
So if the system doesn't meet their expert criteria, it's basically useless.
Functionally useless.
Yeah.
They hold the knowledge, and that knowledge is power.
Okay. And the BA, the business analyst.
The BA is the translator. They translate the executive's big picture vision and the SME's technical requirements into concrete, executable documentation.
They're the communication bridge.
They are. And if the BA misunderstands the scope, the entire execution is flawed from the start. Their high interest is driven by their accountability for those requirements, and their power is their control over the definition of done.
I find it fascinating that the SME and the BA are classified as high influence, right up there with the executive who's controlling the money. But doesn't managing closely risk turning into, counterproductive micromanagement, especially with high-power people like executives?
That is a critical challenge, and it's exactly why the strategy has to be proactive, not reactive.
Yeah.
You prevent micromanagement by setting very clear boundaries and defining the specific communication artifacts up front.
So managing closely doesn't just mean hourly emails.
No. It means mandatory inclusion in things like daily stand-ups. It means required co-signing on change control documents. And it means high-frequency, detailed status reports that are focused on operational metrics, not just subjective feelings.
So the executive is guaranteed to get that detailed status report before they even have a chance to ask for it.
That's the key.
You're filling the information vacuum that would otherwise tempt them to step in and start managing your team directly.
Exactly. You're managing risk by managing alignment. If you fail to communicate enough, the executive's lack of visibility will trigger their personal involvement, which is micromanagement. By managing closely, you satisfy their high interest and you manage their high power at the same time.
And it keeps them focused on strategy, not tactics.
Exactly. The investment here is massive, no doubt, but it's absolutely necessary. Q1 is where the project lives or dies.
Okay, so we've nailed down the power centers at the top right. But now let's shift our focus. Let's move horizontally on the grid. We're keeping the influence high, but we're dramatically dropping the interest level down. We are now in quadrant 2. High influence, low interest.
Yes. These are your strategic watchers, Or, maybe more accurately, the veto holders.
They possess significant, sometimes absolute power to affect the outcome or provide the resources.
If they only care about the strategic outcome, the profit, the market share, the daily workflows, or the minute-to-minute tactical decisions.
They only care about the strategic outcome, the profit, the market share, the compliance, the return on investment, and the overall cost, not the 1,000 steps it took to get there.
And because of that, the required action shifts dramatically. We go from manage closely to a mandate that can feel a bit counterintuitive, keep satisfied.
Keep satisfied.
This quadrant is all about efficiency and trust. The objective is to maintain their satisfaction, their assurance, without overwhelming them with unnecessary detail.
So the communication currency changes completely.
It has to. If you send a detailed 50-page technical requirements document to a high-influence, low-interest stakeholder, you haven't satisfied them.
You've just frustrated them. You've wasted their time.
Which directly violates the keep satisfied principle.
That is such a powerful insight. Less information equals more satisfaction in this zone. So the communication have to be just ruthless in how targeted it is.
It's not the full game tape, it's the high-level summary. It's focused purely on strategic decisions, key milestones, and most importantly, something called exception-based reporting.
EBR. Okay, what's that?
EBR is really the mechanism of satisfaction here. You only communicate when things fall outside an established boundary. So, for example, if the budget variance is within 5% of the baseline, they hear nothing.
Silence is golden.
But if a critical milestone slips by more than 2 weeks, then they receive a tailored report on the impact and the mitigation plan. This basically confirms that their high power is only needed when the project enters a critical state.
Looking back at our customer ordering system map, the roles that are placed in the strategic power zone include the customer and the sponsor, and, interestingly, the regulator.
The sponsor and the customer, they hold the financial key. They want assurance that their investment is safe and it's progressing towards the desired outcome.
But they're busy running their own businesses.
Yeah.
They don't want to manage the specifics of this project.
Exactly. Their power is high, they can pull the funding, but their interest in the daily burn rate is low. So communication to them is often just a concise, single-page summary dashboard, maybe weekly, maybe bi-weekly.
The regulator, though, that feels like a slightly different dynamic of high power, low interest.
It is. The regulator is a perfect example of pure mandated influence. They are not invested in your project's success or its profitability or your team's internal happiness.
No.
They care strictly about adherence to law and industry standards, things like data privacy, GDPR, or financial transparency, SOX. Their power is absolute. They can legally shut your system down, but their interest is incredibly narrow.
So the communication strategy for a regulator is almost entirely formalized. It's transactional documentation focused purely on adherence.
Right. You don't try to collaborate with a regulator.
You comply with them.
You comply with them. You're delivering compliance logs and legal reviews, not friendly status updates.
So you meet their specific narrow requirements as efficiently as possible.
And any unnecessary detail is a risk. You are giving them only the required sign-off documentation and nothing more.
Now let's talk about the hidden risk here. You mentioned it earlier. Because they're low interest, they aren't actively monitoring everything. That might feel safe to a project manager, but I have a feeling this is probably the most volatile quadrant.
It is the single most volatile quadrant, precisely because of that latent power. If a major failure occurs, a huge budget overrun, a critical missed deadline, or even worse, a public compliance failure,
Their interest level is going to spike.
it will spike instantaneously, from low to emergency high. And when absolute power meets suddenly activated high interest, the result is almost always project termination, severe penalties, or a complete destructive overhaul.
Wow. So that makes the keep satisfied action the most crucial form of risk mitigation you can do.
It is.
You're preserving the strategic neutrality. You're using that tailored communication to assure them that their powerful intervention is not required.
You are, in a way, protecting your project from its own sponsor.
That's a great way to put it.
That is the highest aim of Q2 management. You keep them satisfied by proving stability and adherence, and by doing so, you keep their powerful hands off the steering wheel unless the alarm bells are absolutely 100% necessary.
That's a fascinating look at the power centers at the top of the grid. But let's shift our focus now to the bottom half. This is where the project's daily reality is lived, even if the formal power isn't there. We're moving across that horizontal line, so we're now dealing with stakeholders who have low influence. Let's start with quadrant 3. Low influence, high interest.
Yes, these are the involved contributors.
So they're often highly invested, right? Sometimes even emotionally invested in the project's success.
Very much so. Because the outcome, the changes, they directly impact their daily workflow, their careers, their workload.
But, and this is the key, they lack the formal authority to significantly alter the strategy, the budget, or the scope.
They are the users who have to live with the system every single day. They have strong opinions, they have detailed knowledge, but they can't sign the change request form.
So the action required for this critical group is to keep informed.
And the distinction here between Q1's manage closely and Q3's keep informed is absolutely vital for conserving resources.
How so?
Well, Q1 stakeholders are involved in making the project. Q3 stakeholders just need to know what is being made and, more importantly, how it affects them.
I can see the immediate risk here. Because they are highly interested, they'll naturally want to be involved in the decision-making.
Of course.
But if you let every single user contribute to the requirements definition, you have instant uncontrollable scope creep.
And that is the core management challenge of Q3. The strategy is really twofold. You have to maintain their morale, and you have to manage their expectations.
Okay.
So they require regular updates to feel valued, to understand the context, and to prepare for the change. However, as our source material specifies, their involvement has to be controlled. It has to be limited to prevent the kind of scope creep that can just cripple a timeline.
So the communication flow is mostly one way.
Primarily one way, yes.
Yeah.
From the project to them. And it's focused on progress, deadlines, and expected impacts.
Let's analyze the population of this quadrant in our customer ordering system example. It's pretty dense. Who are these involved contributors?
Yeah, this quadrant is packed. It's the engine room of implementation and support. You have the supplier, the internal users who will actually operate the new system.
And the technical team.
Right, the developer, the tester, and the trainer.
Let's talk about the developer and the tester for a second. They are literally building and validating the system, yet they're classified as low influence. That seems a little counterintuitive given how essential their work is.
It's a formal classification. Their influence is low in the sense that they execute requirements that were defined by the BA, the PM, and the executive in Q1.
So they can't unilaterally change the budget or the delivery date.
Exactly. However, their high interest is absolutely critical because that's what drives quality and commitment. The tester's interest in having bug-free code, the developer's interest in an elegant architecture, the trainer's interest in effective instructional material, all of that is paramount for user adoption.
Okay, so what happens if we fail the keep informed mandate here? What's the consequence?
Resistance, pure and simple, particularly from the internal users and the trainers.
Right.
If you don't keep the internal users informed, they'll resist the new system. Maybe out of fear of the unknown, or confusion about their new roles, or just feeling like they weren't heard.
And their high interest makes them a powerful force.
It makes them either the strongest operational advocate you have post-launch, or your fiercest resistor. Their active buy-in determines whether the system is successfully adopted or if it gets quietly circumvented by everyone.
So how do we practically leverage that high interest without giving them undue influence or, triggering that scope creep we talked about?
This is where you use specific mechanisms. Things like periodic town halls that are focused on demos and roadmaps, not on decision-making.
Okay.
You use feedback loops like structured user surveys. Or you have dedicated channels for logging suggestions. These are monitored by the business analyst, but they are explicitly not treated as immediate change requests.
So it lets them vent their interest, provide essential usability data, and it maintains morale.
While the PM retains control over the scope baseline, you manage their expectations by being transparent about why certain suggestions can't be integrated right away.
It sounds like Q3 management is really the art of psychological engagement.
I think that's a great way to put it.
You ensure they feel respected and informed. And by doing that, you secure their operational support for a project they can't officially stop, but must ultimately use.
It is risk mitigation against failure to adopt. They're on the front line.
All right, finally, we reach what has to be the sweet spot for any project manager looking to maximize efficiency. The bottom left, quadrant 4, the zone of low influence, low interest.
We call these the minimalists.
The minimalists. I like that.
They have neither the significant formal power over the outcome nor a high personal investment in the day-to-day specifics of the project.
So if you took them off the mailing list, it might take them weeks to even notice.
And the project would proceed completely unaffected.
So the action required here is thankfully, blessedly simple and highly efficient. Monitor.
Monitor, that's the instruction. And this group offers the project manager a huge opportunity for communication efficiency. The strategy is to invest minimal, and I mean minimal, resources. Communication should be automated, scarce, or only necessary if that stakeholder's classification shifts because of some external factor.
So they might get the lowest priority system-generated notification.
Or maybe they're just added to an internal distribution list that they are completely free to ignore.
In our customer ordering system scenario, who are these minimalists?
The roles listed here are the help desk and the system admin.
Let's think about their low interest, at least initially. The help desk is probably interested in new issues and how they'll be resolved.
But they are not invested in the development of the system itself. They only care once it goes live and starts generating tickets.
And the system admin is similar.
Very similar. They only care if the new customer ordering system affects their server load or maintenance schedules or security protocols or resource allocation.
Right. The project isn't their core focus.
No. System stability across the entire enterprise is their focus. So until your new system threatens that stability, their interest remains low.
So if they are low power and low interest, why do we even bother to monitor them? I mean, why not just ignore them completely?
Because of the potential for a shift, and because of their critical role in the project's longevity.
Okay.
While they are peripheral to the development phase, they are essential for post-implementation maintenance and incident resolution. The system admin, for example, possesses just enough power in terms of server allocation or system access to become a major blockage if they're suddenly alerted to a high-risk factor.
So monitoring ensures we catch that shift in their interest before they leverage the limited but still critical power they do possess.
Exactly. For instance, if the system admin sees a major security flag in the new system's design, their interest level could instantly spike. And they could jump from Q4 right up to Q2 high influence, keep satisfied by, say, freezing server allocation until the issue is addressed.
So monitoring is really a passive, low-cost investment in organizational risk awareness.
It's an automatic check. It ensures that if the minimalists suddenly detect something that fundamentally affects their core responsibilities, we catch it early.
And until that shift happens.
Until then, this quadrant is where the project manager saves vast amounts of time and mental energy, which, as we discussed, must be reallocated to the complexities of quadrants 1 and 2.
And that distinction is really the heart of efficiency, isn't it? If you treat the help desk in Q4 with the same communication effort and frequency as the subject matter expert in Q1, you are actively dragging the whole project down.
You are.
So the matrix provides that organizational permission to say, you are not a priority for detailed reports, and that is a good thing for everyone.
That is the essential shortcut. It clarifies that communication is a strategic resource that must be allocated, not just distributed equally.
That breakdown of the dynamic power interest grid is incredibly useful, especially when you're analyzing individual stakeholders on a project. But I understand our sources also introduce an alternative approach, the categorical stakeholder analysis. How does this one differ from the grid?
Well, while the influence interest grid gives you that dynamic, almost moment-to-moment map of relationships for a single complex project, the categorical approach is, I would say, more useful for organizational standardization.
So it's less project-specific.
Exactly. It groups stakeholders based on their general nature and their relationship to the organization. And that allows for the creation of standardized reporting templates and communication workflows that you can replicate across many different projects.
So the grid is custom-built. The categorical method is scalable.
That's a great way to put it.
It simplifies the definition process by aligning the interests and influence with the role itself, regardless of the individual person occupying that role.
Precisely. We can break down the 4 key categories that are provided in our source material. And for each one, we can look at the defined role, their inherent attributes, their interest and influence, and the non-negotiable communication strategy that comes with it.
Okay, let's start with the operational core of any project, the internal stakeholders.
The source gives the project team as the prime example here, and their attributes are defined as high interest and high influence.
Which maps perfectly and very logically to quadrant 1, the manage closely group.
It does.
So what level of operational rigor does this categorical strategy specify for communication with them?
The strategy is simple and direct. Frequent meetings, detailed reports. And this isn't just a suggestion, it's mandated. Because these are the people whose time and activities are directly controlled by the project, the communication has to reflect that need for granular operational detail.
So the detailed reports we're talking about here wouldn't be fluffy summaries?
No, absolutely not.
They would include actual artifacts like updated RAID logs, that's risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies, and granular task statuses. Maybe even detailed RCI matrices to make sure role clarity is there.
Absolutely. The frequency and the detail ensure constant synchronization. If your development lead is an internal stakeholder, they need to know about the SME's requirements changes instantly because it directly affects their work. This is high volume, high detail communication that's necessary for delivery.
Okay, so moving outside the immediate organization, we get to external stakeholders.
Yeah.
These are crucial partners, but they exist outside the internal hierarchy.
The examples given here are suppliers and customers, and their attributes are listed as moderate interest and high influence.
Moderate interest. That suggests they're primarily interested in the contractual fulfillment and the final deliverable.
But not necessarily in how the internal project team structures its sprints or resolves its internal conflicts.
Right.
It aligns pretty closely with the keep satisfied approach of Q2, but that moderate interest acknowledges that they still need to be aware of major progress or risks that could impact the contract terms. A supplier, for instance, might be managing 50 other projects, so their interest in this specific customer ordering system is moderate compared to our internal team's high interest.
So what does the categorical communication strategy dictate for this group then?
Regular updates, emails, meetings. The focus shifts from that granular operational detail needed by internal teams to more targeted assurance. The updates are typically milestone-driven.
So they might align with contractual payment schedules or deliverable acceptance criteria.
Exactly. It's communication that's focused on trust and delivery confidence, rather than on day-to-day collaboration.
So the goal is just providing consistent, measurable assurance without that constant high-touch management that the internal core team requires.
Precisely. You are keeping them happy by confirming that the project is on track to meet their high-influence expectations.
Next up, we have a highly specialized group, regulatory bodies.
Their role and responsibility is defined by examples like government and legal entities. And their attributes, which we touched on earlier, are crystal clear. Low interest, but critically high influence.
The quintessential external power broker. They're detached, they're transactional, yet they possess absolute power to enforce compliance.
And their communication strategy, therefore, is highly formalized. Compliance reports, legal reviews.
Okay.
This category forces the project manager to recognize that communication here is not collaborative. It is purely transactional and documentation-based.
And that's a fundamental difference in how you allocate your resources, right? You don't spend hours putting together a weekly status meeting for them. You spend that time preparing an auditable document that demonstrates your adherence to a specific statutory requirement. Whether that's a financial regulation like SOX or a privacy regulation like GDPR.
It standardizes the time sink. When a regulatory body is identified as a stakeholder, you immediately skip all the conversational updates and focus solely on the necessary legal and compliance documentation.
And if you try to send them a colorful project dashboard,
you're wasting their time and yours, and you're potentially revealing non-compliant information unnecessarily.
And finally, we address the group that actually has to live with the change. The end users.
The examples for them are given as employees and customers. And their attributes are defined as high interest but low influence.
A perfect match for Quadrant 3, the keep informed zone.
Exactly.
They're the recipients of the change, so their interest is naturally high, but their formal power over the project's direction is usually low.
And the communication strategy here is tailored perfectly to that dynamic. User surveys, periodic updates. And I think this is a brilliant structural strategy because it addresses both attributes at the same time.
How does it do that? How does it address the high interest and the low influence in one go?
Well, the periodic updates satisfy their high interest. They manage expectations, they announce upcoming features, they provide clear training timelines. This keeps the users engaged, and it reduces resistance.
And the surveys.
The user surveys allow their high interest to be leveraged. You get essential feedback on usability, on training needs, on interface design, but without granting them the formal power to authorize scope changes.
So you gather crucial information without opening the door to that uncontrolled scope creep.
It's a way to democratize feedback while retaining authoritarian control over the execution. The focus is all on adoption and mitigating that post-implementation friction.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The categorical approach is so invaluable because once you classify a group as end users, the project manager knows instantly They know they have to dedicate time to writing a standardized monthly periodic update newsletter and making sure the user survey infrastructure is working.
Instead of spending that time preparing detailed reports that this group doesn't need.
Right. It automates the resource conservation process across the entire organization.
This has been an incredibly deep and structured analysis. We started with the chaos of too many opinions, and we've ended with a clear, almost mandatory roadmap for communication. We examined the influence interest grid, which gives us those 4 dynamic strategies based on the power and care dichotomy. Manage closely, keep satisfied, keep informed, and monitor.
And then we complemented that with a categorical grouping, which really reinforces the necessity of tailoring the communication artifact, the actual thing you send to the stakeholder's core nature.
Right. Whether they require those detailed reports as an internal operational member,
or a formal compliance report as a regulator, or just a strategic summary as a sponsor.
So the core insight here, driven by all the source material, is that the stakeholder matrix is not a suggestion. It's the fundamental tool for prioritizing resource allocation.
Yes. It defines the exact tailored action that's needed for each group. And the efficiency gains come from having that organizational permission to not communicate with certain groups.
Powerful.
It allows the project manager to focus their effort intensely on those high-influence groups Q1 and Q2 to ensure governance and funding stability,
while also securing the operational support of the highly invested groups, Q1 and Q3, through consistent targeted communication.
All while conserving vast amounts of time by applying those resource minimal monitor or purely transactional strategies to everyone else.
So let's leave you with this final provocative thought, drawing directly from the efficiency gains we've just dissected. How much risk do you carry, and what is the measurable hidden cost to your project's timeline when you fail to distinguish between the types of reports you issue?
That's a critical question.
Think specifically about the resources you waste when you treat a powerful but detached, high-influence, low-interest sponsor with the same communication frequency and level of technical detail as you treat a core project manager in the Manage Closely quadrant. Your project's success and probably your own sanity depend entirely on recognizing that sometimes the most effective communication strategy is to say less, but to say exactly what is necessary.